Go ahead and get started with some of our housekeeping items while some folks are still filtering in. So welcome to day 2 of the Grant Writing Virtual Summit. If you were here yesterday, great to see you again. If not, welcome to the summit for the first time. So happy to see you here. Today, we're going to be sharing with you 3 hours of educational content related to grants and nonprofit education, with the goal of helping grant writing and nonprofit professionals be more effective in their everyday work. So are you ready to take your grant strategy to the next level? All right. So before we get started, we do have a couple of housekeeping items that I just want to mention. So number one, you can win prizes at this summit, and we've already been giving away about 15 prizes so far, with many more coming today. So the easiest way that you can do this is simply by posting what you're learning throughout the summit on social media using the hashtag GWVS2022. And you can also tag Instrumentl at Instrumentl. Number two, we have some secret words, excuse me. These secret words are going to be presented at the end of each presentation. And if you collect 4 out of 6 of these secret words, you're going to be able to receive a certificate to showcase your completion of the virtual summit. All right, so keep an eye out at the very end, and you should be able to see those. And then we will be asking for those in a follow-up email at the conclusion of the summit. All right, with that out of the way, the next housekeeping item has to do with any questions that you may have come up throughout the duration of the summit. This is going to be especially relevant for this first Ask Me Anything session. So in order for us to notice your questions, please include 3 hashtags before sending. So it would be, hashtag, whatever question you have. And that's just going to help it stand out so that we can make sure that we're not missing any questions. All right. And finally, our last housekeeping item has to do with our conference resource guide. So we've provided a link in the chat. Go ahead and click on that, and that'll have everything that you need to know about this summit, from prizes to partner promotions to additional resources and everything. So if you have any questions, this conference resource guide is going to be a great place to start. All right. With all of that out of the way, the last thing we want to do is thank all of our wonderful partners that have helped us put on this event, especially largely for free. A special thanks to the 4 partners who are here today for our Ask Me Anything session. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to give a few brief introductions to our panel, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So today we have some wonderful experts with us. Very excited. We have Dr. Bev Browning. Dr. Bev is a Michigan native who lived in the Flint area for 45 years. She is known for consulting in grant writing, RFP responses, technical writing, and organizational development. Her deep expertise has resulted in her clients receiving more than $500 million in funding. And her well-known book, Grant Writing for Dummies, has sold over 1 million copies. So we're very excited to see Dr. Bev this morning. And in addition to Dr. Bev, we also have Siobhan Richardson. Siobhan is the founder of Think and Ink Grant Consulting. She specializes in helping 501c3 nonprofit organizations get grants in the areas specifically of women, children, health, and education. And she and her team at Think and Ink Grant Consulting help nonprofits think, then ink your next grant by providing a one-stop shop of outsourced end-to-end grant seeking support through 5 services, being nonprofit consulting, grant research, grant writing, grant management, and evaluation support. So in addition to these 2, we also have Shalia Phillips. Shalia helps nonprofits grow their efforts through sustainable fundraising efforts and grants. Through her signature program, The Right Solution, she helps growing nonprofits write competitive grant proposals by designing fundable, high-quality programs. And she has personally used the same framework with her clients to win nearly $3 million in foundation and corporate grants. So very excited. And then our final panelist today is Margit Brazda-Poirier. Margit founded Grants for Good, LLC in 2009 and has since helped thousands of nonprofits achieve their grant-seeking goals. She has over 25 years of nonprofit management and grants experience, a GPC, and is a GPA approved trainer, having written and received over $30 million in federal, state, foundation, and corporate grants. So we are very, very excited to have them here this morning and for our Ask Me Anything session. And so how this is going to work, a brief breakdown. We are going to have a few questions that we've put together before the conference over the past few weeks that we'll start with, and we'll go through our panel and get some of their answers to these important questions. And then while that's happening, we'll be taking all of the questions that you have through the chat, writing those down. So at the very end, we'll have time to address any questions that come up, okay? So if you have any questions throughout the duration, reminder to post those in the chat, and we will get to those at the very end, okay? Awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing, before we actually dive into it, you'll see on the screen we have two promotion codes, GWVS75 and GWS2MO. GWVS75 will save you $75 off of your first month if you choose to pursue a plan with Instrumentl, and GWVS2MO will save you an additional month off of your annual plan. Just a reminder, the presentation is being recorded, and we will email everybody the slides and the recording afterwards. Okay, so keep an eye out for that in the next day or two. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So if you haven't already, you can share in the Zoom chat your name, organization, what you do, and then let us know how many day one workshops you were able to attend. I see a lot of familiar faces here, so I think we have quite a few people who's attended one or more workshops, so let us know. All right, so our agenda, we're going to be going through how to prospect smarter, how to write stronger proposals, how to build stronger relationships with funders, and how to stay on track with your grants calendar. And then we will answer any outstanding questions. So these are going to be the four main areas that we cover until we get to any of those outstanding questions. All right, so let's dive on in. Starting with how to prospect smarter. All right, so let's see. Let's start with this first question. What's your number one prospecting secret? Let's see. Dr. Bev, would you like to answer this one right off the bat?
Yes, thank you, Chandler. Well, remember, I've been out here for a long time, so my number one prospecting secret would be intuition. And when I say intuition, I mean that I can just look at the profile of a person and tell right away if they're a potential giver. I can look at the profile of a foundation or corporation and learn how to research everything about it. And suddenly it just resonates. This is the one. This is the one that's going to award the grant.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Bev. Do any of the other panelists have anything that you'd like to mention as well for this first question here with regards to your prospecting secret?
I can start. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I love that Dr. Bev said intuition. I was afraid to say that, but I'm glad you did, because it is important in this field. The other thing I would add to it is noticing trends and patterns. I look a lot at what funders have done in the past, who they have funded in the past, and for how much. And by looking at those trends, removing some of the outliers, I get a better idea of what they might do for a client that I'm working with.
Siobhan, did you have something that you wanted to add as well?
Yeah, I totally agree. I was just going to echo what Dr. Bev shared as far as intuition. And I think as grant professionals, we are very fortunate to have that gut feeling, right? Because we've been doing it so long. And so I think that's valuable. And one of the benefits of working with a grant pro, right? We have the intuition. We can kind of get to the bottom of things pretty quickly without wasting a lot of time. I would also add that a big prospecting secret, and it's still continue to echo a lot of things shared today, is just doing your research, knowing the past history of a potential funder as far as geography, as far as the type of projects they like to fund, really having an research as far as the appropriate ask amount, like all those things are really important. I think nonprofit leaders often skip all of that, right? And they go right to, okay, well, generally, I think it's the right fit. And you can save a lot of time by doing some more research into the individual funder.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Some great insights there. All right, so let's keep it moving. So let's see. This next question has to do with what data do you find the most useful when evaluating a funder's fit? So what specifically are you looking for when it comes to that? Julia, would you like to answer this one?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I echo the sentiments of just knowing intuition, but for me, the most useful data that I take a look at goes a little bit beyond the surface level of eligibility terms and geographic reach. I really take a look at the funder's priorities. So not just as a foundation, but also for the particular funding opportunity. So let's just say they have different levels to what they're looking to fund, making sure I take a look at that. And the ultimate cheat code is, as you're doing more research into the funder outside of what's available, in terms of the XYZs of the RFP, you start recognizing the language that they use, as well as seeing their information on past grantees. So all of that's on Instrumentl's website. I like to look beyond the curtain, how when you have the opportunity, it gives you just general information. I like to just take a deeper dive on their website to see what their priorities are and also who they funded in the past, because that lets me know some things to look out for and to be mindful for with the proposal.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning Instrumentl as well, because I know we have a lot of useful 990 data that we visualize for you with regards to that. So thanks for that. Siobhan, Margaret, Dr. Bev, would any of you like to add anything with regards to the data that you find the most useful?
Well, I guess the 990 is number one, but number two is looking at who's on the staff and who's going to be making the decisions for this particular funding area. Then I do a LinkedIn profile search to see if they're on LinkedIn. I look at all their background, where they went to college, everything. I try to guess which generation they represent by the information in front of me. And then I determine if the client is really a match in the areas of not just funding priority, but ability to make that first contact with the prospect and to talk with a level of education about what they fund. So I actually do role plays with my clients, and they have to practice like I'm the funder, and they have to talk to me like I'm in the generation of whoever might be over the decision making. So that also helps me in prospecting.
Awesome. Very interesting. I love that, getting into the minds of who you're actually reaching out to.
Chandler, I have something to share as well
Yeah.
with this question. So, when you go on Instrumentl, you do see two data points: the total giving, the average giving, and I believe the median giving is also on there as well. I think those are very, very important data points, but I will kind of speak to another data point that is not commonly available, is information. This is more in the federal grant space, information around dollars invested by congressional district. And I bring this up because if you notice on federal grant applications, they will ask what congressional district the particular organization is in. And they do that because they want to make sure that they're either aligning the dollars with congressional districts, tracking how much investment is going into that district. And so I would say another thing is just kind of keeping an eye out on a higher level as far as the politics in a particular area, congressional districts where money is flowing. And that's not information that's easily available, but I could probably attest for myself and other grant pros on this phone, just on this call, just through our experience and just our knowledge and kind of relationships we've built over the years. Getting access to that information is really important, and it's not one of the easiest things to gain access to, but I think it's really important to have insight into where the money is flowing as far as congressional districts.
Awesome. Very interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure I've actually heard that one before. So that was a very interesting take. Thank you. Thanks, Siobhan. Awesome. So with that, let's keep moving on. So our next question has to do with, some common mistakes. So what are some common mistakes that you see folks make when completing their prospect research? So still in that prospect research phase. Let's see.
I could tackle this one. I'm excited
Okay.
to tackle this
Yeah,
one.
go ahead.
I think the common mistake people make is they jump right into writing. I think they don't take time, and I'm a big proponent of using the logic model, that they don't take time to really think through their program, all their activities and the outcomes and what they're looking to do before they start writing. So I think that would be the biggest thing, really being thoughtful about what your program is, not just very high level, but very detailed, going into exactly who you're looking to serve, why, and what you're looking to accomplish.
Siobhan, I'm going to second that because I'm one of those crazy people like you that love the logic model and their eyes cross and they're like, really, who likes that? But same reason, it's a great planning tool, and so often as grant professionals, we're helping organizations plan their programs, right? For me, I'm going to add another one to that. I think one of the biggest things I see is people won't reach out and contact the funder. So they find this great opportunity, but they say, well, I don't really want to call someone and talk about my project. So I think after they have a full handle on their project, as Siobhan just mentioned, it's so important to contact somebody. And I know some of the questions Chandler sent us really are around how you find those people. But it's very important to reach out to them when you do, whether it's through an introduction or social media or some other way.
And just to add a small tidbit to both Siobhan and Margaret, I think as professionals, we also have to look at the end-to-end research of it all. So not just prospect research to determine alignment, but I also take a look at what's required for the application. I work with a very lean team, so we have to be mindful of how big of a feat do we have to accomplish with this grant proposal. And also, if you're a smaller nonprofit, you have to look at those reporting requirements. So just as Margaret mentioned, a lot of this isn't on the website. So you have to pick up the phone and say, hey, this is who we are. This is what we do. We just want to get to know more about you. So the magic sauce is really y'all behind closed, I don't want to say closed doors, but it's behind the website and calling the funder to ask natural questions. They're humans just like us. So I'm sure that the curiosity that you have does not offend them or shun them off in any way. I've been practicing this for a long time, and y'all are talking to an introvert. So I didn't like picking up the phone either. But I found that a lot of my success as a grant professional came from picking up the phone, and not just for the application or determining alignment, but also to see what's required of us once the money comes through the door. So it's a really true gem. Thanks y'all for adding to that.
Awesome. Great answers there. All right. Well, we're going to keep on trucking. We have a lot of questions to get through. So this last question for how to prospect smarter has to do with, specifically how can a grant writer get better at prospect research fast? So if you're trying to, really develop that skill, what advice would you have? We can start with, let's see, Dr. Bev, would you like to answer this one?
Yes, subscribe to Instrumentl. I can't tell you how many hours I spent on other high-end databases for grant research, trying to pull together information that was all over the place into one cloud folder to share with the client. I don't have to do that anymore. What used to take me 40 hours, it now takes me about 4 hours because of the algorithm availability and mechanisms within Instrumentl. So I'm just a fan because now I have a whole lot of hours free when I take a contract for grant research that I didn't have before.
Love that answer. I just want to preface, we did not plan that. Thank you so much, Bev.
You're welcome.
I could add too, I used to look at and subscribe to pay subscriptions for at least 5 different databases, as well as combing through 990s. And it was Dr. Bev that was like, Instrumentl does all of that. So I say that to say, Dr. Bev has converted me to an Instrumentl user in our firm, to Instrumentl users. And I totally agree. It has saved us so much time as far as all the things that we used to do. And I just can't communicate how helpful it has been.
Hey, I'm going to add to that. I think it's great. We are not being paid to say this, by the way. There's a caveat. One other thing I want to add, though, is really good record keeping is so important. I've stepped in and met with nonprofit organizations, and I've asked them, who has funded you in the past? And they said, well, I wish we knew, but our development director left last month and we don't have a good database, or we lost the data. So I think keeping track of who's funded you in the past is so important, because as you know, those are probably our top prospects for approaching in the future for funding. And, you know, let me just say something about Instrumentl here is I've been using it to do exactly that. So we use it to keep a grants calendar too. So it's another option.
Awesome.
And I also want to add, there's so much collective wisdom in this room. And from these ladies, when I first started out, I had no clue how to write grants. Like y'all, it was just literally baptism by fire. But what I found that helped out with my research is just to keep at it. As a type 1 Enneagram, we like to identify patterns and routines. So I noticed that as I was going through different listservs, there are common areas that you're always going to look for. The blessing with Instrumentl, as everyone has shared, is that they put it all in one place and they automate it. So if you love systems and tools and automations, try out Instrumentl so that you don't have to, I would say, set out a set amount of hours every week, but they can email you anytime a new RFP comes out with all of that information. So one, identify the patterns that come out in RFP announcements and use a system. I prefer Instrumentl that can automate that process for you so you don't have to do it manually.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for the wonderful advice there. So that concludes our first topic, which is prospecting smarter. So let's go ahead and dive into our second topic, which is how to actually write stronger proposals. So our first question here has to do with what's the most common thing that folks leave off of their proposals that makes a difference between a good and a great proposal. So what's going to be that thing that pushes it from, you know, one level to that next level? Let's see, would Margaret, would you like to answer this one?
Yeah, sure. I was just thinking back on my days as, believe it or not, an executive director of a family foundation. I say believe it or not because this was not on my career radar at all. But just before I started Grants for Good, I did that for several years when their longtime executive director retired. And in those years, I learned a lot about what goes on behind the scenes. And one thing I noticed is we would have hundreds of grant applications come in a year, and there were almost no bad ideas, but it was often difficult to know two things. One, the big picture, you know, what's your bottom line? What's going to change, which in our world, we call outcomes in our grant writing world. And two, I sometimes saw great ideas, great outcomes, but no clear way to get there. So in other words, the actions or the work plan didn't really look like it was going to work, or it wasn't described clearly. My thought is if a funder has to read your application 3 times and still doesn't understand the big picture or how you're going to get there, your proposal probably won't be funded.
Good answer. Awesome. Would anybody like to add anything on top of that?
I'd probably like to add the response to the sustainability question. Funders want to know, after their investment dollars have been shared with you, because they are making an investment, how are you going to sustain the program beyond that point? And funders don't want to fund programs where people have not been very thoughtful about how are we going to continue this program going forward. If your answer is, we're going to keep writing grants, that's not a full answer as far as the continued sustainability of the program. So I think when I come across proposals, and this is from being a federal reviewer and also as a program manager at Bank of America Foundation. So whenever I would see proposals where that was kind of not fully discussed, I'd question, is this a good investment for us? Because we're not going to continuously invest in them year over year over year. And if that's the case, what's their plan? And I think a lot of people miss that part. And when I see a very good sustainability response, that tells me these people are thinking, and that to me is a really competitive proposal.
Awesome.
And Chandler, I want to add, for me, especially with foundation grants, I've noticed that nonprofits have opportunities to develop the balance between logic and pulling on heartstrings. So if you all are here from my community, one of the things that I don't want to say preach, but just really beat the brow on is that you won't win grants by pulling on the funder's heartstrings alone, but by the vision that you can clearly articulate. So when we look at grants, yes, it's a solicitation for a charitable purpose. So naturally, you know, there may be some feelings learning about youth who don't have after school programs and, you know, things of that nature, but it's also a logical approach to written communication. So we have to make sure that we're clear and clear enough to where we're not leaning so much on, you know, heart space that we aren't giving funders, to Siobhan's point, end-to-end comprehension of what's going on and making sure that that's flushed out entirely.
Some great advice there. Awesome. So I think we can move into our next question. So now we know, you know, some common mistakes. What about, do you have any timeless advice for organizing your grant proposals? So as far as organization goes, any tidbits there? Let's see.
Hi, this is Dr. Bev. I am a fanatic about writing in order, starting with the first section or question asked by potential funders to the last. I don't, if I have information for, like, say, program design, but I haven't started to do the need yet, statement of need, or even organizational background and capability, I won't take that information I have and plug it in. Why? Because in order for me to connect the dots, it goes from the beginning to the end in order. Otherwise, if I'm interrupted, take a phone call, get up and walk away and come back, I'm lost and I'm staring at a screen and I'm not sure, okay, where do I go with this or what do I do? But if I've been writing in order, it's really easy to pick up because now I can glance back and the dots are starting to come together in my mind and I just start typing. So I don't like to skip around and just plug information in a later section. That's important for me to manage the visual part that stimulates my mind to come up with the information that goes in the document.
This is a real simple piece of advice. I'm gonna be real quick, y'all. Start early, especially when it comes to portions of the grant proposal that you don't have any control over, like attachments and budgets. I'm telling y'all from personal experience, you do not want to be on D-Day, right? And still waiting on a budget from finance or a letter of support. So when you're starting early, start with the elements that are not within your direct control first. Preferably a few weeks ahead of time, but as soon as you see the RFP and you know that you're going to go after it, make sure that you get those attachments.
Awesome. Great advice there. So let's move into our final question for proposals. So what's your top piece of advice for improving one's writing within a short period of time? So like within 6 months, for instance, what advice would you give? See, Siobhan, would you like to answer this one?
You know, I can't answer this question, but the 6-month thing is getting me right. I would say do as much learning as you can about writing grants. Dr. Bev has multiple books to get for self-education. The Grant Professionals Association is another good place to get engaged with as far as going to conferences and kind of teaching yourself. And so I would just say within that timeline, just learn as much as you can from everywhere. Well, I take back, not from everywhere, but from reputable sources that are approved by organizations. I am a GPA approved trainer. And so if you go to the GPA website, GPA stands for Grant Professionals Association, you will see myself and other Grant Professionals Association approved trainers who do host webinars and a lot of different sessions. And so I encourage people to roll up their sleeves and kind of dive pretty deep into those types of sessions. That way you can learn as much as you can in a very short amount of time.
I'm going to add to that. I agree with Siobhan, and I think a lot of practice is so important. So I'm mentoring somebody right now that wants to get into the grant profession, and her writing is improving a lot with each proposal that we write. And I feel so passionate about this because I think we need more really qualified grant professionals in the field. So I want to take the time to train people in doing this. So I think really learning, as Siobhan said, from reputable sources, and secondly, really practicing. And if this is something that's new to you, obviously practice it within your own organization, but maybe you can volunteer for other organizations too, if you have the time, and broaden your ability to write. And I got to tell you, one of the prizes today is my All About Grant Writing course. So hopefully you win it, because it's all about grant writing.
And stay tuned. That will be the prize for the third session today. So keep your ears listening.
And Chandler, before we move on, just to add on to that question, I would encourage our audience to read more. For me personally, the more I read books, magazines, blogs, I've even kind of went into turning on like closed captioning just to exercise my brain. The more I read, the more inspiration that I have, and seeing how others clearly communicate their points. So in your spare time, if you have some time between scrolling social media and family life, just try and pick up a book or so, and that helps you be a better writer in a short amount of time.
Great advice. Great advice. Yeah, I think, obviously when trying to learn something, you have to dive into it. So same goes for grant writing. Awesome. So with that wraps up our strong proposals. Let's dive into our next one. We're making some good time here. So how to build stronger relationships with funders. So this is going to be all about those relationships. What's your favorite approach when it comes to initiating relationships with new funders? Let's see.
Chandler, I connect with them on LinkedIn. I look at the profile on Instrumentl, and then I click on their 990. I look at the board member names, everything that's there, that's information gleaned. And then I start looking at LinkedIn, because that's where we have business to business connections. And I plug in those names and start asking for connection. I usually never write any kind of a message, because I think people get tired of agreeing to connect and then having to read this long rhetorical kind of paragraph that's canned at best. So then when they connect, and it's like, how do we know each other? And it's like, we don't. But I'm working with a client who I will be helping make the first initial introduction of their organization and meet with you. And I just wanted to connect in case you have any questions for me, or if you would like for me to connect you with the executive director or development director at the organization. Just let me know how I can help facilitate this. And that's it. I don't build relationships on behalf of my clients. I think it's their job, their role, their duty to take a seat at the table and do something.
Great advice. Great advice. Awesome. Would anybody else like to add on top of that?
I can share one thing that I would love, and I'm kind of putting my former program manager hat on for a minute at Bank of America Foundation, of one thing that I love to see, and then one thing that I did not like to see. And I'm sure Margie could share her experiences as being an executive director of a foundation. The one thing that I would not be as excited about when nonprofit leaders would reach out would be adding me to their newsletter list. It was a little interesting because, folks in those positions, they get a lot of emails every day. And so to get a newsletter list where I'm kind of like blindly included on this monthly newsletter list would just be another thing in my inbox for me to delete, and nothing that I would read. So I would encourage nonprofit leaders to, send a personal note, right, to me. You can include a link to a newsletter that refers and shares the things that you were doing, but something a little more personalized, sharing kind of the things you're doing in your report, anything like that. Very brief, no longer than a quick read, is a lot of times what I recommend. And another thing that I really like, and this is probably the two things I'm bringing up are probably along the lines of after you've gotten through that first step of connecting with someone. Sometimes I would really like coming into the office, and seeing a package on my desk or an actual envelope with someone mailing something. I think sometimes we get so involved in just reaching out via email, and sometimes to get outside of that, and it's just to Shalia's point about sometimes just picking up the phone or some type of human-to-human connection. One time I arrived in my office, there was an envelope, and in it was a letter from one of the children that we helped. Thank you so much for the recent donation. Here is a picture of me drawing, whatever thing that we were supporting. And it was really touching. Like, those are things that I would put on my office wall and I would keep, and I would always remember that person. And so things like that, and just kind of stepping outside the electrical, engaging via email. And of course, this is outside of LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the go-to if we are going to engage through any type of electronic way. But in addition to email, that in-person connection of perhaps mailing something that stands out, because we don't receive a lot of mail anymore. So when it comes in, it's kind of like, hey, what is this? And it gets your immediate attention.
Awesome. Margaret, would you like to add anything on top of that?
I think those are all great ideas. And I think really social media is underutilized. I love LinkedIn too, because as Dr. Bev said, it's business to business connection. I've also found that a lot of private foundations, funders have Facebook pages. So I recommend getting on their Facebook page, clicking the like, and starting to get involved with them and engage with them that way. Especially if they're a funder that's hard to reach in any other way, then social media is one good kind of not new, but certainly different way of connecting that a lot of people are missing.
Gotcha. Great advice. Yeah. So I think LinkedIn has established themselves as a great resource for the grant writing and nonprofit world. So it's interesting to see how these other social platforms will develop as well, and what new and innovative techniques we can use on those. All right, let's dive into this next question, which has to do with funders saying not to contact them. So if a funder does explicitly say not to contact them, but the funder really matches your program, what can you do to mitigate that? Let's see, Shalia, would you like to answer this?
Sure. Again, using social media, particularly the mutual friends feature. So let's just say you're a nonprofit founder, you're running a list of contacts through your board. You can find this out on Instrumentl, shameless plug. You'll have a list of people that they identify as either board members, leadership, etc. You can run this list via LinkedIn to see if there's any mutual contacts. And if there is, have that person do a warm introduction. Now, you may not be guaranteed an invitation to the next, RFP cycle, but you can find out, what are your reasons behind being no contact or invite only? Maybe they only give to a certain set of organizations, or maybe they only give to a certain region. Like funders do have their reasons, but you can also just get to know them and also ask them if they know anyone within their network that would be potentially interested in funding your cause. So again, utilize social media, particularly the mutual friends feature, to just do more research. And your level of success isn't necessarily an invitation, it's gathering info as to why and seeing if there's anyone else in their network that could support you.
Chandler, I also will look at people who used to work for that funder. So who used to be there in a high-level position like program officer, board member, trustee, whatever. And I actually will reach out, connect to them, and then type right in there when we connect. I understand that your previous employer, the ABC Foundation, does not accept unsolicited proposals, does not want to be contacted. But I have a project that I'm working on for a client that I know would be of great interest to the founder if he were still living. So who can you open the door for so that I can talk to them? Who do you recommend? Can you make a phone call? Can you do an email? Can you give me someone's private email address so I can try to give my message to them? And I was shocked. I did this with a major corporate giving foundation, like billions of dollars in the coffers. I got a call on a Sunday night from that former employee. I could not believe it. And he said, this is who you need to contact and let her know that you talked to me. And it was such a special moment, first of all, because it was a weekend night, but that he actually reached out to me personally and didn't go back through LinkedIn, but went to my website apparently and got my phone number. So that was surprising.
That's a great story. That's amazing. Very awesome. Very cool. Awesome. So we have 20 minutes left. So I want to make sure that we get through all of our questions and have plenty of time to address the questions that have been coming up. So I'm going to start moving just a little bit quicker through these. So our last question with regards to building stronger relationships is, what are some unconventional ways that you've heard of to build stronger relationships with funders? So using things outside of, mainstream tools. Some of these may have been addressed already, so we might be able to address this pretty quickly.
I have one I'm happy to share, Chandler.
Mhm.
I have seen, and just in relationship cultivation conversations that we provide our clients, we have at times had conversations around, this is pre-COVID, upcoming events and fundraisers that funders are having, and for nonprofit leaders to attend to learn more about the foundation, the things they're funding, and also to network. I think it's been instances where we've had nonprofit leaders in the room. We've had leadership at the foundations in the room, and a simple introduction. Hi, my name is so-and-so, and this is what I do, and this is my organization, and we're in the same town. I think we should know each other or connect. Here's my card, right? Something as simple as that. And I think this does echo the human-to-human connection, which unfortunately we haven't been able to do much of given COVID, but hopefully soon we can get back to that at a more regular pace. So I would say taking advantage of those opportunities to come out to events hosted by foundations. I think a foundation, a leader at a foundation would see that, wow, this person's really wanting to learn more about us, wanting to know more about what we do. They're very invested, and they're also connecting with us by making an introduction and seeing where that introduction leads.
Great advice right there. Awesome. So let's dive into our next category, which is dealing with grants calendars. I know this is a question that these are questions that come up a lot with our own internal workshops. So I want to see what you all have to say about this. So our first question is, what are some of your favorite ways to stay on top of your grants calendar? And I don't know, Margaret, would you like to answer this one?
Yeah, sure. I mentioned earlier that we do use Instrumentl for grant tracking. So that's certainly a good way to do it. And I have another way too, which, don't be embarrassed if you do this, but I actually write things down on paper still. I don't know if you know anyone who does that. I write them on paper. I have one of those big pads and I stick it on my wall, and I'll have grant deadlines for various clients that are coming up this month. And I started doing the really big sheets just recently because I broke my thumb and I was in a cast. And the only way I could write is in really big letters with my dominant hand. So I found those big sheets were helpful, and I'm going to continue doing it because that way I have it visually in front of me as well as tracking it on my computer.
Awesome. Let's see. Julia, would you like to add anything?
I love using Instrumentl in tandem with Asana. So it's a project management software. So once we pull down a grant report from Instrumentl, we're able to track, for example, funders as tasks and the due dates. So Asana does a really good job of reminding you of what's coming up that week. So we make sure that we're tracking end to end, not just, getting the grant out the door, but if there's anyone else that we need to contact, like really managing that entire process in a project management software. And if you're tech savvy, you can use websites like Zapier to connect your Asana to Gmail to capture those attachments that may come through, because we all know emails can get crazy. You may forget to download some things. Zapier can auto download it to your Google Drive and then let you know in Asana to check that. So use systems if you are comfortable, because it helps out a lot. My brain can't keep up with everything, so I rely a lot on technology.
I can echo Shalia's statement. I would definitely agree. I'd also just emphasize, I'd have to say processes 3 times, because like to Shalia's point, like you can't keep it all in your head at all. And the project management piece is really important too. I would say, you know, I'm fortunate thinking at grants that we're a team of folks to help manage this whole thing, because it can be a lot. And so part of our processes is having monthly meetings with our clients. That way we're reviewing anything that's happened over the last 30 days, anything upcoming over the next 30 to 60 days. And it allows us to support our nonprofit leaders and hold them accountable, right? As far as either cultivation activities that we need to do, certain parts of grant applications that we need to submit. And so that whole process just kind of helps us always keep everything moving and always be way ahead of where we need to be. If I had to give some advice to nonprofit leaders, I would probably echo the reliance on technology. I would probably also say calendar reminders are really key. Anything that integrates with your calendar to remind you to do different things is very important. Having something on like whatever drive you use that syncs with a link that can be shared, and for everyone to kind of input information is really key. As things update, it helps teams communicate to each other and communicate things that need to be done and what's due. So those are the 2 things I'd recommend for nonprofit leaders: calendar reminders to remind everyone about what's going to happen next, and also using any type of shared drive, whatever it is, whatever your preferred shared drive software is, but something where it updates and everyone knows what's going on at all times.
Awesome. Some great recommendations there. I know we actually use quite a few of the things that you recommended technology wise, and we're all about building systems. So great to hear those echoed. All right. So our next question, the top 3 things to track on your grants calendar. What top 3 things are you looking for? And since we only have about 10 minutes left at this point, I think we'll just do one answer and then we'll just keep moving through any of our remaining questions. So let's see, Dr. Bev, would you like to field this one?
Yes, the due date. I don't want to be caught with only 2 or 3 days left before I realize that something's due. So I typically want my clients to submit at least 7 to 10 days before the deadline, and the grant calendar helps me keep an eye on that.
Awesome. Great advice right there. All right, so let's keep moving. What do people often leave off of their grants calendar that you think that they should be sure to include? So some things that you might not immediately think of including, but you find extremely helpful.
I'll jump in. I think the notification date, because oftentimes my clients will say, wow, we submitted this grant way back, 5 months ago, and when do we hear back from the funder? So if a funder tells you what the anticipated notification date is, I think it's helpful to track that, because then you know when to follow up with them if you haven't heard anything.
Great recommendation right there. Awesome. So we have a lot of questions that have come through as we've been going through all of our prepared questions. So I want to make sure we get there. Real quick, I'll let you know a little bit more about Instrumentl. We are a grant fundraising platform that helps with grant prospecting, tracking, and management all in one place. That's why we call ourselves the institutional fundraising platform. We have all of this available data, like we mentioned earlier, that makes it extremely easy. And on average, we're saving about 3 hours a week and increasing grant application output by 78% each year. So it's a great platform. If you haven't tried it already, we've included the link for a 14-day free trial. And if you sign up for that free trial, you will be doubling any entries that you have for prizes throughout the rest of the summit. So that's just a little bit about Instrumentl. And now let's go ahead and get to all of our submitted questions. All right. So our first submitted question has to do with when you're reaching out on LinkedIn. This question is brought to you from Kelsey. And she was wondering, what language would you suggest using when you're actually doing the reaching out? So if you're going to include a message, how are you phrasing that? What language are you using?
I'll take that, Chandler. I like to use the term thought leader a lot, and I'll say, hi, your name looked familiar to me. Were you at the Disney Institute's training for thought leadership? It's just a tickler. I know who was in that class, and it wasn't that person, but it always starts a conversation and it's casual, and then I don't have to use it as a business event the first time I reach out.
Love it. That's some great advice. Nice little trick right there. Awesome. Would anybody else like to add on top of that when you're doing any LinkedIn outreach?
I would add, I like to use a template that's been pre-thought, right? That includes the things that you want to share. But I use the term template very loosely because it's just a time saver to include the basic information that you want to include, with always personalizing it to the person that you're reaching out to. I think it brings down, sometimes there's a lot of anxiety to reach out because you're like, oh, what am I going to say, right? I have to think about what I want to say. If you have a template, it cuts down on all of that. Let me think about what I have to say. The thought has already been done. And now you're you're just making, personalizing it to the person. And you'll be including, the things that you want to make sure that you include. And it sounds good and no thought needed. It's very easy, especially if you're wanting to reach out to multiple people at one time. Having that in place is really, really helpful, especially sharing it with your board and sharing it with, your grant writer and just making sure, hey, does this sound right? Reading it aloud, reading to someone else, like, what are you feeling? What are you feeling when you're on the receiving end of this information? Am I conveying the messaging that I want to convey? And if all of that is done and it looks good, then having a template is the way to go, as long as you personalize it to the specific individual.
Awesome. Great answer. Yeah, templates can absolutely save a ton of time. So definitely on board with that. Our next question has to do with, we had mentioned logic models earlier, and Crystal and Kelsey were interested if there was a specific logic model that you use to get a little bit more knowledge about what you were referencing when you were talking about logic models.
Well, I could take that one since I brought it. It's a very deep topic, so I'll just provide very, very high level. So you can Google logic models. There are a lot of examples out there, but just a quick summary, it's really about thinking about your inputs, right? The things that you need to run the program, any activities associated with the program, any outputs, which are, for lack of a better term, the widgets that the activities will create. And then talking about the short-term, long-term outcomes, and then any impact that the overall program wants to do. And so going through that process of doing that helps you think through all the details of the program. And again, there's a lot of logic models out there. You can check out the Kellogg Foundation. They have some really good ones too. There are some specific logic models depending on your type of program. They have some, and CDC too is another good option. They have some specifically around anything regarding health. They have some specific for education. So a good Google search can yield some good results around logic models.
I'm going to just second what Siobhan said. That was great advice. And since we're logic model geeks, all of us, I think here, I would also have one piece of advice for developing a logic model. And I teach this in all my training sessions, is start with your outcomes first, so that you can be very clear on what your bottom line is, on how people's lives or the community will change for the better. And then you can be sure that all of your activities and resources align with those outcomes. And then the second thing about logic models is I use one that also has an evaluation component, so that it's all the things that Siobhan mentioned that we've been talking about, but it also has benchmarks for success and indicators, or things that you will measure to know that you've reached a certain level of success. And this then helps me develop the evaluation plan, or simply answer the question, how will you measure your success? So, but yeah, there's lots of great stuff out there. Kellogg Foundation is probably the gold standard, but it's often a little more esoteric than we need. It's a good one to look into.
Thank you so much for those answers. So
Hey Chandler, can I add one quick piece of advice
absolutely.
on models?
Please.
What helped me out as a newbie is looking at the activities, and for every verb that we had in the activity section, making sure that that aligned with the budget. So that's one way to use your logic model, not just for program planning, but for also looking at what's needed and how much it's going to cost, and clearly articulating that to funders. So make sure that you're using your logic models holistically, not just to check it off on the attachment sheet.
Awesome. Great advice there. So we have probably 2 more minutes of questions. So maybe for these last few questions, if we could just really lightning round, 1 sentence answer, just try to get through as many of these as we can. So starting with, would you all include a work plan even if you were not asked to in the RFP?
This is Dr. Bev. Yes.
Okay. Dr. Bev says yes. Awesome.
I say yes if you can attach it, and if you can't, make sure elements of the work plan are in your narrative.
Okay. Awesome.
I would ask first, but that's just me.
I would
Awesome.
definitely, if it asks. If not, I'd be really creative as far as incorporating into the narrative and following any other rules. Like if they explicitly say no additional attachments, then listen to whatever they say. But if you're able to and be creative with it into the narrative, then definitely go for it.
Awesome. Okay, so does the length of your grant proposal matter? That's a question from Linda.
If it's federal, this is Dr. Bev. If it's federal, yes. Right to the points or the percentages that are assigned to each section of the narrative. So if you have a 20-page maximum application that you can write, and it's worth 100 points, and I always subtract the budget because that's not a part of the narrative typically in most federal applications, but I still go with 100. And 40% is the weight on a particular section. What's 40% of 20? 8 pages. 8 pages to the last line, or with a graphic filling up the last half page so you have no white space left. It's important not to overwrite or underwrite when you're on a government grant application that has percentage weights.
Great advice. Awesome. All right. So that is all the time that we have. We want to make sure that we let our panelists get to anything else that they have, while also giving everybody a break before we start our second session of the day. So I just want to again thank Dr. Bev, Margaret, Siobhan, Shalia. Thank you so much for attending this morning. I know I got a ton out of this. I'm seeing a lot of comments that I think a lot of people got a ton of useful knowledge out of this. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us this morning.
Thank you, Chandler.
Awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, this was a great time. Hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Everybody.
All right. So I do want to, before we wrap up this session, let everybody know that we are going to be giving away another prize. So this is a 30-minute consultation with another one of our grant writing experts, Rachel Werner. And yeah, so a free 30-minute consultation for any grant-related issues you're having. All you have to do is share what you've been learning so far using the hashtag GWVS2022 and tag Instrumentl in that. And as a reminder, we are also going to be giving away 10 Amazon gift cards on top of everything else that we're giving away. And to qualify for that, all you have to do is either sign up for a 14-day free trial if you are not a customer. If you are a customer, just share what you have on social media, and then we will double your entries for the raffle. Awesome. And with that, we're going to take a 3-minute breather. Oh, sorry, before we do that, excuse me, I want to make sure everybody gets their secret word from session 4, and that is instrumentl. So instrumentl is the secret word for session 4. Go ahead and jot that down. And in our follow-up feedback form, you will have the chance to redeem those secret words for that certificate. All right. And with that, now we're going to take a quick 3-minute break, and then we'll be back for how to prioritize your prospect list. All right. So see everybody in 3 minutes.
Sounds great. Bye, everyone. Good to see you all.
Same here, guys. Take care.
See y'all soon.
And we will be in the same room, so no need to exit out. We will be in the same room, and we will get started at 10:02 Mountain Time, so 12:02 Eastern Time. All right, see you all in 3 minutes. We're gonna get started in just 1 minute. In the meantime, if you haven't already, if you're just joining us after session 1, or if you didn't, go ahead and let us know your name, the organization you work for, and one of your biggest challenges that you have when it comes to grants. So it is 2, so we should have plenty of time to have gotten a drink of coffee, a little snack, what I may have needed. So now let's go ahead and start session 2. All right. So before we get started, I do want to go back over our housekeeping rules. So if you are just joining, we do have 4 housekeeping rules that we'd like to draw your attention to. Number 1 being that there are going to be a ton of different ways to win prizes throughout today. We gave around 15 yesterday. We're going to be giving about 20 today. So a ton of chances. The easiest way is by just sharing what you've learned throughout the summit using the hashtag GWBS 2022, tagging Instrumentl, and then sharing that on social. So our second housekeeping item of the day has to do with our secret words. So at the end of each presentation, you will see a secret word, and write those down, because at the end of the summit, we'll be sending out a feedback form. And if you can provide 4 out of 6 of those secret words, then we will give you a certificate to showcase your completion of this summit. Housekeeping item number 3, if you have any questions that come up throughout the workshop, make sure to include 3 hashtags before your question, and that will just help it stand out, so we can make sure that we're trying to address as many questions as we possibly can. Okay, and then our last housekeeping item has to do with our conference resource guide. So we've shared that in the chat. You can go ahead and download that guide, and it's going to have everything that you need to keep track of the summit. So it's going to have ways that you can win prizes. It's going to have all of our promotional offerings from our partners, extra resources, everything you need. So if you have any questions, definitely start there, and it should be able to answer a lot of those for you. Okay, and with that, let's go ahead and get into session 5. So our second session of the day, 5th session of the conference. So if you haven't already, you can jot down these 2 promotions on the screen. Apologies, there is a typo here. So do not include the 0. So it should be GWVS 75. So without the 0, and that will save you $75 off of your first month with Instrumentl. And then GWVS 2MO will save you an additional month off of the annual plan if you choose to go that route. Our presentations are being recorded, and we will email you the replay and the slides at the conclusion of the summit. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to be talking about how to prioritize your prospect list in under 60 minutes. All right. So again, if you haven't already, go ahead and share all this information. Your biggest challenge that when it comes to prospect research, just help us get to know who you are a little bit better. Okay. My name is Chandler Clayton. I host these weekly grant workshops with our expert educators and best-selling authors. And together with Instrumentl, I've helped over 1,800 nonprofits in finding, tracking, and managing their grants. Every single day that we're running these workshops, we're getting feedback, and we're using that feedback to cater these workshops to what nonprofit and grant writing professionals need to know to excel at their work. Okay. And so with that, I have a couple of questions that I just want to get a pulse on. So let me know in the chat with just a simple yes or no. Do any of these resonate with you? So do you ever feel unsure whether your organization is going after the right grant opportunities? Let me know in the chat. All right, I'm seeing some mixed answers here. So some yeses and some nos. All right. Yeah, so it seems we're a little bit split on this one. What about this next question? Do you ever feel overwhelmed by the number of things that you have to do when it comes to grant seeking? There can be a ton of things involved. Tons of yes. Okay, this is way more unanimous. So it seems like everybody is slightly overwhelmed when it comes to the process of grant seeking. All right, what about this one? This last one. Do you ever feel discouraged because you've been rejected by funders before? I see some yeses. Absolutely. It can be tough to get those rejection letters. Yeah, so for the most part, it seems like we're all on the same page there. Well, have you ever thought to yourself, are grants worth all the effort? The answer is yes, a resounding yes. So foundation giving is actually second only to charitable giving when it comes to funding nonprofits. And private foundations represent the largest award source for nonprofit organizations. So with that, grants are the ‑1 source of foundation giving. And with that, there are just so many opportunities out there. There are over 87,000 grant making foundations, and there are over 11,000 active grants right now on Instrumentl alone. We're adding about 100 every week. And so the moral of the story here is there are a ton of opportunities to find funding if you are struggling in that area. Okay. So our agenda for today, we are going to talk about fit and why it matters. Then I'm going to go through 10 different questions that we can use to help rank funders. Then we'll dive into what exactly is a decision matrix. When should you use one? How can you create your own? And then we're actually going to start prioritizing prospects today using our new decision matrix. Okay. All right. So let's dive on in. Why does fit matter? Well, fit matters for a number of reasons. Number one, grants are extremely competitive. I don't have to tell you this, you're probably very familiar. Applying to loose fit grants drastically reduces your chances of success, right? And with so many different opportunities out there, finding those good fit funders, it helps you prioritize and focus, only on the best of them. And when you're focusing on the best, it's ultimately going to save you time that could be better spent elsewhere. So that's why fit matters. It also helps you be more efficient in the long run. So setting up those systems, I know a main topic of our AMA this morning was setting up systems to help with success. And the same goes when you're talking about prospecting. So setting up those systems is going to make you more efficient in the long run. And then it's going to be easier to receive funding from repeat opportunities if you're able to align with their goals and you're able to effectively show it. So setting up those systems not only puts you in a good place right now, but it sets you up for success in the future. Okay. So continuing on with why fit matters. When you think about it, funders are seeing thousands of applications, some of them thousands of applications every day. And so with that, only the best fits are going to make it past their initial scan. It's going to be a very quick skim, yes or no. And so you need to stand out, right? And foundations have certain criteria that they're held to when it comes to their funding. So it's important that the ones that you're applying to, they align with the criteria that you also value to show that you're on the same page. And so when you think about foundations, what they really are stewards of capital. What I mean by that is the foundation ends up giving, funding to a nonprofit who is then using that funding to create a positive impact in the community. And so through the nonprofit as the middleman, foundations are essentially giving capital to be put back into the community. And so when they're giving grants, they're looking largely at what that final stage is going to be. What is going to be that impact in the community? And what is the perfect nonprofit that is going to get me there? Okay, so that in short is why fit is so extremely important. So now I want to spend a little bit of time focusing on these 10 questions. So you can jot these down. I'm also going to share a decision matrix template with you that will have these 10 questions in it. So don't feel obligated to write them down. You'll receive them in that tool. You'll also receive them in the follow-up. So starting with a couple of questions specifically about grant RFPs. So our request for proposals. Does the grant's project requirements and mission align with your own goals? That is one of the most important questions that you're going to want to answer right off the bat before you even go about applying to a grant. So you want to make sure that, you are in alignment, that, if you just look at a quick glance, you can see that the impact that you're doing aligns with what that funder is looking for. And then number 2, does your organization meet this opportunity's eligibility requirements? That is usually a very simple, you can check. I'll show you how to do that with Instrumentl, but you can just real quickly see eligibility requirements, see, obviously, if you don't meet them, it's not going to be worth your time. If you do, pursue. All right. So with that, now we can dive into 4 questions specifically about our funders' giving history. So these have to do, with how our funders give. So how open are they to new grantees? Are they giving more historically to repeat grantees or new grantees? And is it easy to get your foot in the door? When you're working with foundations, you'll see that some of them, they're very open to working with, new organizations. Some of them, they have their core list of, however many organizations they've worked with in the past, and they like to stick to that list. So the openness is going to be a big indicator of, how easy it is for you to get your foot in the door. Another important question that we often don't think about is the geographic location and whether or not that is represented historically with the funder's giving. So what I mean by that is if a funder has historically been only giving to organizations in the state of California, you are in the state of, Utah, clearly it's not going to be the best fit. Whereas, if you see that you're an organization in California, you're applying to that same grant, you're going to be way more likely to actually succeed. Okay. Moving on, how closely do past grantees align with your own organization? So if you're looking through the list of past grantees, we talked about this a little bit yesterday in our leveling up prospecting workshop, but how closely do they align with the work that you do? Are you able to pinpoint, a few of these past recipients that are in the almost same exact line of work that you do? So for example, if I work for a, environmental organization or a nature center, and I'm looking at, this funder's giving history, and I see that there are 4 other, nature centers in my region that have received funding, that's a great indicator that it's, going to be an opportunity that is worth pursuing. Okay. And then finally, have new grantees historically received as much as past grantees? This is a really important question when you're actually framing your ask. And this is something you're able to see with 990 data. It's visualized for you with Instrumentl. but you can see, you know, a lot of organizations, they like to build a relationship. And so they're a little bit hesitant to give larger amounts to first-time grantees. They'll give a lesser amount and then they'll build that relationship once they understand that, you know, this organization is able to sustain that impact. And then they'll raise the amount, you know, that they're able to give year after year. Sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes organizations have a new, you know, strategy when it comes to grants. And so they're trying to give more to innovative new organizations that they haven't historically worked with. So it's important just to know where they're coming from before you actually go by your ask, and that will help you refine that. And I see a question in the chat about how you can tell new from repeat grantees, and I'll actually show you how we can search for that in Instrumentl in a little bit here. Okay, so those are questions pertaining to funder giving history. Now I want to go into two very important questions pertaining to giving medians. So we're looking at the actual giving amounts. So number one, is the giving median amount worth going after? This is, you know, this is a tough question to just put a blanket response on. It's very specific to each organization, but you have to take a look at, you know, your own team. And for instance, if I work on a very small team, I'm the only grant writer, or maybe I'm the only person on the development team. Is it going to be worth it to go after a grant that is only worth $500 when I'm trying to raise $250,000 for my program? Probably not. You know, you might want to start out looking at some of those higher grant amounts, like, you know, for instance, $5,000. That's, you know, the same time it's going to take you to win 10 different $500 amounts, you could win one single $5,000 grant. And obviously, you know, the process for applying might be different. It might be more lengthy. That's something that you'll have to weigh when you're actually going through those two options. And number two, do historical giving trends actually show positive growth? So this is extremely important because this shows whether there's anything going on internally at the foundation. So if we're seeing negative growth year over year, that's showing us that there's something going on internally at that foundation that is leading to them giving less in grants. So whether they are, you know, less profitable, whether or not, you know, they're in a position of turmoil, whatever that may be, that is a sign that it might not be the best fit. Whereas if we're seeing that they're giving more and more year after year, that's going to be a great opportunity, especially if we're a first-time applicant with this funder. Then that's going to be a great opportunity for us to, you know, get our foot in the door while they're really ramping up that grant, the amounts that they're giving. Okay, so now let's go into our last two questions. So our last two questions have to do with your internal team. So a lot of this, you know, you're going to be considering your internal team when thinking about these, but these two specifically deal with your bandwidth. So do you have, you know, the bandwidth to actually tackle the proposal as well as the reporting requirements? If you were in the AMA this morning, one thing of the great pieces of advice we got was to look at the whole process, you know, so look at the reporting requirements, because after you actually win the money, you are not done. There's a lot more to be done. You actually have to be able to track, you know, your metrics, make sure that you have systems in place for that. So do you have that? Are you able to effectively track that? If not, it's going to lead to a negative relationship with that funder. If you actually do win the money and you can't report, it's going to, you know, negatively impact that relationship, and you're going to be way less likely to receive that grant the next year. Hope that makes sense. So, excuse me. So yeah, so looking at that, and then, you know, again, if you're a small team and you're looking at two different proposals, one has a very simple application process, you know, submit a letter of interest, and then submit a proposal, or another one you have to get a CV for every member of your team, letter of commitment from a university, things like that. You can see that, you know, you have to evaluate the time that you're willing to put into each opportunity, as well as, you know, how good of a fit it is. And that's where the decision matrix tool is going to come into play, because sometimes you find one where you're perfectly aligned, but it's going to take a ton of time to actually apply for. How do you evaluate that against one that, you know, takes less time, but is a little bit of a looser fit? That's where we're going to come in with our decision matrix tools. But our last question has to do with connections. So does your team or your board or even your community, do you have any connections through them to the funder? So a great way of getting your foot in the door is by having a relationship with the funder before you even go with the ask, right? So leveraging your community and your network is one of the best ways that you can pursue this. We had some great advice. Reaching out on LinkedIn is another great way, inviting them to an event, just connecting before you actually go through with your application can go a long way. All right, so those are our 10 questions that we're going to consider. Obviously, you can refine those to whatever 10 questions are the most important to you in your grant strategy, but those are going to be 10 questions that you can use as a start, okay? So with that, we are giving away another prize. So if you haven't already, go ahead and share what you've been learning today on social media using the hashtag GWVS 2022 and tag Instrumentl at Instrumentl, no A, just TL. All right, and then you'll be entered into a random drawing for the How to Write a Grant, Become a Grant Writing Unicorn books. We have 10 of these that we're willing to give away today. In addition, we have 10 Amazon gift cards that we're going to be giving away. And for those, you can double your entries simply by signing up for a 2-week free trial. We'll be including a link to that in the chat. All right. So let's continue on. What is a decision matrix? It's a great question. A decision matrix, when you think about it, is a prioritization tool. Okay. So a decision matrix helps teams evaluate and prioritize a list of options. And then you can use weighted criteria to evaluate each option against the other. So with that, you can easily decide based on the factors that are most important to your organization, what the best opportunity is going to be. So if we look at this example on the right side of the screen, we can input our different solutions. So in our case, these would be different grant opportunities. And then we have our criteria that we're matching them against, and we're assigning these weights to them based on how important we think each of these criteria are. So for instance, if we think that the alignment to project goals is the most important thing, we'll assign a higher weight to that criteria than we would to something such as the median giving amount, which might not be more as important for us. And then once we input, what we believe, how we think these rank with regards to each criteria, we'll get a total benefit and we'll be able to look and compare each of these options against one another. Okay, so there are a few different tools that you can use, starting with the simplest option, which is an Eisenhower 2x2 matrix. You'll probably hear this referred to as a 2x2 matrix. It's one of the most simple tools. It's really good for prioritizing any tasks based on importance and urgency. It's not as great when you have, a lot of complex criteria that you're working with. So in essence, what you're looking at is how urgent is it and how important is it? If it's extremely urgent, extremely important, you do it. If it's extremely urgent, but it's not that important, delegate it to somebody else. If it's not that urgent, but it's very important, well, then you can plan ahead. And finally, if it's not urgent, not important, go ahead and drop it. So one of our most simple tools here, but it's very effective. If you're just trying to, if you're one of the people, I struggle a lot with decisions. And so having any tools in place that I can simply input and then get, a quick response is very helpful for me. So I hope it's helpful for you too. Another tool that we have is the rubric. You've probably seen these, whenever you were last in school. These are largely used in the education sector. And they're really great because they prioritize different tasks based on your predetermined values for certain criteria. So for instance, something that would receive a 1 would be something that, neglects to show these different criteria. Something that would receive a 4, for instance, would be something that would include all these different criteria that you're looking for. It's not as great when you're dealing with, a lot of different criteria or any criteria that's difficult to quantify. Okay. So moving on, we have our weighted decision matrix. These are used for prioritizing across many different criteria. And these are going to be what we're largely focused on today. The reason being that they're really great for blending your organization's specific criteria along with, weighted inputs to rank things. So you're able to, really take it down to your industry or to your organization's specific needs and get an output that is very easy to compare. And I'll show you what I mean by that when we actually go through it. The one area that could be improved with these decision matrix, and it largely comes into how you set them up, is sometimes they can be a little bit more difficult to change as time goes on. Because if you might have to reevaluate things based on changing criteria, depending on how that importance changes with your own organization. Okay. So let's go ahead and get on into when you should use these decision matrices. So when to use a decision matrix? Well, you're going to want to use them when your team has limited bandwidth and you need help determining which will be which option is going to be the most rewarding. So when we're looking at prospecting, it's really helpful for saving time, only going after our best prospects and leaving out any loose fits or any ones that just, at a deeper glance, they might not be the best option. Okay. So if you want to compare several different options against your internally determined criteria, and then if you're just looking to be more strategic and more efficient in your grant strategy, this is one of the greatest ways that you can do that. It is a great system that you can set up. And, the setup might take you a second, but once you start inputting values, it's going to save you a ton of time. Okay. So everything we're talking about goes back to those systems, and everything we're going to be talking about is probably going to go back to those systems. We really like driving that point home. It's all about the systems. Okay. So how do you actually create your own? Well, a few different steps. Step one is determining what you actually want to consider. So what's your overall use for the tool? Most of us here are probably going to be using this tool to help determine go versus no-go funding opportunities. Some of us may have a different use for it, determining, different things to include, whatever it may be. That it comes down to what you're trying to achieve within your organization. We're going to keep it simple and just look from a prospecting lens. So when you're looking at grants and you're trying to determine which ones are the best to go after, that's going to be our use for today. And then who's going to be using it? So grant writers are probably going to have different criteria versus development directors or executive directors. Your development directors and your executive directors, they're probably looking more so for amounts that you're going to receive, how you're going to track it. So reporting requirements, things like that. Whereas grant writers are probably looking more at the actual proposal process, looking at, alignment to goals, things like that. So it's similar, but it varies a little bit based on who on your team is looking at this. And so you want to determine whether or not you want to make one specifically for the grant writer organization, specifically for your executive director, or one that blends the needs of both. Okay. Step two is going to be utilizing past data. So this is extremely important because, it's hard to look forward without looking back, right? And so you want to use some past examples of some grants that you've pursued, using both those that you've won as well as those that you've lost. Those that you've won are great, but sometimes you get better insights from the ones that you've actually lost. Learning why you lost. What was the main factor here? Was it a bad fit? Do they not represent my geographic area? Was my proposal just not strong enough? Those are things that you want to consider before you actually go through with developing the tool that we're going to develop today. Okay. And then you want to review it, and determine the most important factors that you had in either winning or losing them. So things such as meeting those eligibility requirements, not being represented geographically, or having that loose alignment. You're going to want to determine on every single grant that you've won and lost, not every single one, but you're going to want to take a snapshot. So what were the main factors for winning and what were the main factors for losing? Okay. Once you have that better understanding, then comes step three, which is actually developing your criteria. So what are the most important criteria for deciding when and when not to pursue a grant? So we've talked about these over. So these are things such as meeting grant amount, alignment with past grantees, alignment to project goals. What is the most important factor to your specific needs? And then you can always think beyond just the grant. So, a lot of time you'll be stuck looking at, what's the grant amount? How much can we receive? How difficult is the reporting process? But you need to take a look at your internal bandwidth and your team's capabilities when determining this. So if you have, a first-time grant writer, you're probably not going to want to go after a huge, national level grant worth $500,000, where the application process is extremely tedious. And there are a lot of things that, a first-time grant writer probably wouldn't understand that is going to lead to, obviously getting rejected. So it might be better to go after a local grant, for a smaller amount, just determining what that basic need is for your team. And then you can always be honest with yourself. That's my main advice here. When you're developing these criteria, don't develop it like this unrealistic standard that if everything was perfect, this is how we would look at things. How are things right now at your organization? And what is really important? Obviously it would be great to say it doesn't matter how long the process takes. I'm just interested in the amount that we're getting. But in reality, when you're actually doing the day-to-day, the process does matter. So be honest with yourself with that regard. And if you're okay, for example, not working with an organization that's that closely aligned with your goals, if it's more about the grant amount, that's fine too. Just be honest with yourself and use that to develop these criteria. Okay. So with that, we're going to actually go ahead and start doing this together. And so before we actually develop our decision matrix tool, I want to set everybody up with an Instrumentl free trial. That way we'll be able to pull some examples that we can input into our tool and actually look at some real life examples and start prioritizing them based on what we collectively decide are important criteria to us. Okay. So the easiest way that we can do this is through Instrumentl. And so that's what we're going to do today. I do want to be fair. There are a lot of alternatives as well. You can just Google all this information. There are, there's ProPublica, different listers, Charity Navigator. You can look through 990 forms to find all this information. There are a lot of different avenues, but I'm going to recommend Instrumentl for these reasons. You may have seen this if you're in session 1, but we really are the institutional fundraising platform. What I mean by that is a lot of other platforms will either help with grant prospecting or with grant tracking or with grant management. It's rare to find one that actually does all three. And so that is something where Instrumentl shines. It really does help with the prospecting, tracking, and management. If you're here yesterday, you probably got a great run through of it. If you're just joining, I'll give you, a brief run through, and then we'll actually go through, inputting these values. But one thing that I want to drive home, what I always like to say is, look at this last point here. It saves 3 hours per week per person and increases your grant application output by 78% after a year. Well, 3 hours a week per person, that's 12 hours a month, more or less. And that's time that you can put towards anything. So that doesn't have to be towards, other grants. That's stuff that you can actually put towards your projects, towards actually being out in the community, things like that. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I see Will has posted the link in the chat to go ahead and sign up. I'm going to go ahead and switch screens here and sign up with you. All right. Pull up this screen. So this is what you should see if you click that link. I'm going to quickly go through this. Go ahead and leave a thumbs up in the chat when you're ready to click next. That way I'll know you're tracking along. And don't worry if you're a little bit slower. You will be getting you these slides and these resources after the summit's over. So don't worry. You can track along at your own pace then. Okay. Going to real quickly put in all of my information. All right, it's going to ask whether you're a 501c3 nonprofit or a grant writer or an academic government entity or for-profit. The reason why it's going to ask that is because we have different options available that will optimize the platform for each of those respective categories. All right, I'll just say I always give an example. I used to be an environmental educator, and so I'm going to give an environmental education example here. Living in Utah, I'll say Wasatch Wonders is going to be my environmental education company. Going to ask your operating revenue. The reason why we ask this is because newer nonprofits that are below that 90K operating revenue sometimes aren't in a position to actually pursue grants. To be able to pursue grants, you want to have, your visibility. So you want to have a clear, understanding of your impact within the community. And sometimes if you're below that, you're still kind of figuring that out. That's why we put that there. And then it'll ask, 501c3 status, and then you can go ahead and click next. Okay. I see that we have quite a few thumbs up. So at this point, I'm going to continue on just so that we are, not behind on time. It's going to ask you for an onboarding session. This is a really great way to get a personalized run through. So you'll be able to meet one of our team members who will, especially cater your platform to whatever, project needs you're looking for. So whatever funding areas you are looking to grow, we can especially cater that. I'm going to go ahead or I'll just book one for later so that I'm not taking anybody's time slot. I'll book this Friday at 4 p.m. slot. And then I'll cancel that just in case, that does steal somebody's slot. That is still an opening. Okay, we have our nice CAPTCHA. These always feel like a test. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, so now we're going to go to this next step. And now we're actually inputting our organization's information. Okay, and so with this, we're going to put where we're registered. I'm going to run through this quickly since we've been through it a couple times yesterday. We'll be going through it, very quickly in our next session. So I'm going to quickly run through this so that we can get to the prioritizing, but I'll talk through it while I'm doing it. So when you're selecting where you're registered, you're going to want to get to the county level where you're registered, not where your projects are, but where your actual organization is registered. Okay, so I'm going to say Salt Lake County. That's where I currently am. You can select your fiscal year, save and continue. And then it's going to ask your project name. So what are you trying to get the funding for? I'll use an example of trying to get funding for, environmental field trips. So let's just say we're trying to do an after school program where we have these field trips that take students to, some different areas of the state. I'll say I'm a nonprofit. And then it's going to ask this question. Sorry, I see that there might have been an issue with my mic, so apologies if there's a little scratching going on there. It's going to ask whether you are a faith-based organization. And the only reason I bring this up is because it's going to ask whether you want to see both faith-based and secular programs or one or the other. Keep it on both to start with, and you can always change this after. It's just going to give you more options that way. Okay. Now we're in the project details. So we're going where our project actually takes place. So when I look at this, so for my environmental field trips, I'm registered in Salt Lake County. I also have programs in Salt Lake County, so I'll include that. But maybe I also take, students down to Kane County, to the Moab area. Maybe that's where we do some field trips. All right. So Kane County. Maybe we also go, near Zion. So we go to Washington County, Utah. So let's just input that, Washington County, and then I'll leave it there. So really that's just looking all the areas that your project takes place in, and you're going to want to go to the county level as well to be as specific as possible and get the best recommendations. Okay, now we'll input our fields of work. So it says choose 1 to 10, but really what you're aiming for here is anywhere between 3 to 7. And that is because anywhere less than 3, it's going to be too broad. Anywhere over 7, and you risk being too specific and counting out some opportunities that could actually be good fits. Okay, so let's go 3 to 7. Obviously, I deal with environmental education. So I'll put environmental education. I deal with STEM learning. So I'll deal with STEM education. Maybe my program is specifically for K through 12. Perfect. And then at this stage, maybe I'm drawing a blank. I can always select this browse all categories. All right. And so with that, you can actually get these drop-down menus. The only thing I'm going to point out here, other than saying that, maybe my program, thinking about who is in my program. So when I think about my program or my project, not just, what does it cover? Environmental education. who does it deal with? So do I work with children with disabilities? That's one area. The other thing that I would recommend, if you work with any disenfranchised communities, it is going to be great to select this one, minority services. It is going to open up a ton of opportunities that you would otherwise not see. So that is a pro tip right there. If you deal with disenfranchised communities, absolutely select minority services. It's going to open up a lot of fantastic opportunities. Okay. So with that, I have 5 different options. So I'll just continue on from there. And now it's going to ask the size of the grant I'm looking for. So like I mentioned earlier, if I'm a small team, I'm probably not looking at anything under $1,000. Maybe I'm a really small team and I really need to raise a lot. I'll just put my minimum as $5,000 and see what pops up, leaving my maximum open. And then what are you going to use the funds for? So if you have any questions about what these mean, you can always hover over the little infographic and it'll tell you. So obviously I deal with educational programs, so I'll put that. This is for a specific project. And then, maybe I actually have to look at general operating expenses. So maybe I have to fund my, buses. Maybe I have to make sure that every kid has a lunch. So I'll put that in there. And then at this point, I have a pretty good breakdown of what my project needs are. So I'll save and exit. I have the opportunity to add any other users. So it's great if you're collaborating on a team, you can all see everything in one area, which is really nice. I'll leave it blank for now. And at this stage, now I have my open grant opportunities. So let's go ahead and take a look. So the first thing, if you were with us yesterday, this should all look familiar. If not, then the first thing you're seeing here are any open opportunities that are out there, meaning that every opportunity down here has a open avenue to apply to a grant. Your funder matches is going to be foundations. So maybe those that don't have open avenues. So invite only funders, which was something we talked about a little bit in our AMA this morning. But for now, I'm going to stick to the funding opportunities match. And I'm going to look through a few of these different opportunities. So let's look at this Albertsons Foundation. I see the deadline, it's a rolling deadline. Other ones have specific deadlines. If you see one that has a squiggly line under it, such as this, that is using historical data to predict when that deadline is based on when it historically has been. Okay, so I have this Albertsons opportunity. What I want to do is I want to look through, make sure that it's a good fit. So I see Utah's covered. If I look through here, let's see, local communities, yada, 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 increase. Okay, so this is health and human services, probably not as important. Youth and education. So K through 12 education, perfect. In and out of school, perfect. And if I look through the eligibility, I can see whether or not it applies to me there. So this seems like a good opportunity. And then if I look through the 990 data tab, I can actually visualize everything. I see, there was a bit of a downfall. Now it's doing okay. And, historically, they've been really focused in California. So that's a bit of a red flag for me. But all right, so the main point I want to drive here is that we have all this information in one place. And now I want to get you prepared to actually input this into your own tracker. Okay, so let me pop back over to our presentation slides. Okay, so now that you've been through that, booked it, your onboarding call, I'm going to put this link in the chat. Okay, so this link is going to open into your decision matrix template. Okay. Sorry, here we go, 2 seconds. All right, you should see that in the chat now. So if you open that link, it is going to take you to this page. So you'll probably open up on this intro. Okay. And so this introduction page is going to show you how this tool is used. It's going to give you a little bit of a background knowledge as to why it's set up the way that it is. So I'll let you read that on your own, but let's look at the actual tool itself. Okay, so here we have a decision matrix tool. We have our 10 questions that we went through earlier. And then we have a couple of examples that I've already put in here. And so what I've done to walk you back is I've assigned each of these criteria. So if you want to, change this to however you want, I'll zoom in a little bit to make it a little bit easier to see. All right, let me know if you have any issues seeing that. Okay, so based on whatever criteria you want to consider, you can include that here, 10 different criteria, and then we can assign different weights based on how important those criteria are to our organization. Okay, so for example, if we're looking at this, we want all of these weights to add up to 1. That is very important. That's outlined in the introduction slide. But that is because when these all add up to 1 and we input a value 1 through 10 as to how these opportunities actually rank with them, we get a final score, and then it's set up to give you a grade based on that. So for instance, you could approach this in 2 different ways. If you want to just go based off of final score, start with the best final scores and then move down, you can do that. If you only want to go after opportunities that are, a grade of a B or an A or a B, that's another way to go about it. It really boils down to, how wide you want to cast your net. Okay. So let's look through this. This was from a previous workshop that I did where we assigned these weights. So what we see here is that, these median grant amount and then the bandwidth on your team are the most important factors to that group. Would you agree? So let's go back to this first criteria here. Does the grant's project requirements, and mission align with my own? Would you agree that this is probably, top 5 in importance when we're looking at these 10 questions? Let me know in the chat with just a yes or no if you think that this is top 5 things that we should be considering out of these 10 options. Okay, I see a yes. Yeah, so I see a lot of yeses. I would definitely agree. I think alignment is something that's important. Whether or not that's the most important, that's another question. But for this workshop, we're going to get a general idea. I don't want to get too specific. I'll let you do that on your own time. Okay, so would you agree that median giving amount is probably, one of the top things to consider? Top 1 or 2? Would you say yes? No? Let me know. Yes? Okay. Yeah, definitely. I would agree. I think that, when we're looking at this, close fit, looking at our own team's abilities, and then giving amount are probably going to be the most important things. Some less important things, when we're looking at it, historical trends, that could be very important if it's, if we see that there's a huge negative trend, if we're trying to only go after those that are giving more and more, trying to build long-term relationships. But compared to everything else, it might not be as important. So that's why this is given a smaller value than some other things. Same with, have his new grantees received as much as past grantees. That was something that we determined probably not as important for our audience's needs. That being said, that could be totally different for your own personal organization. So this could be, the most important thing is, if I'm trying to build this relationship, am I able to get more and more every year? That could be really important for your organization. So I'll leave that up to you. But with this in place, now we have our opportunities. So let's pull a real life opportunity. So let me go to my dummy account here. And here we have, all of these different opportunities. I'll pull up one of the ones that we're researching. So this is the NEEF Greening STEM grants. So I see, environmental education, yada, yada, yada. So let's start working through this, okay? So if I input this NEEF opportunity, I'll just copy and paste it on over. Okay. I see a message in the chat that the only grants you've ever won are from building relationships. So those relationships are probably going to be extremely important and something that you'll want to, count above other areas. Okay. So let's work through this. So starting with this one opportunity, does this grant's project requirements and mission align to my own goals? Okay, well, let's take a look. So right here, we have the overview. And so with that, I'm able to look through, I see, STEM education, STEM experiences using the environment, training approaches, STEM hub. I'm looking through here and I'm seeing a lot of keywords that pertain to my organization. Educational partnerships, engendering environmental stewardship, absolutely. So I think this is a very close fit. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say this is a great fit. This is one of the best fits that I've seen. So I will put a 10 there. Okay. So working through this, now, does my organization meet this opportunities eligibility requirements? Let's take a look. Here we have the eligibility requirements, open to all Forest Service units, funding can be requested to support yada, 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 travel costs, perfect. So I don't see anything in here that would say that we weren't eligible. I see that there might be other areas that are more eligible. So I'll leave this as a 7 to show that we are eligible, but there are other areas, other organizations that really meet those, explicitly. All right, now let's look at this openness to new grantees. So we can view that by going into our 990 data, looking through, and if we scroll down, this is all of our visualized data, we can see openness to new grantees. 49% of awards have gone to new grantees. We historically recommend that anywhere over 30% is a great indicator that's a good fit. So 49% shows that there is a great opportunity to get your foot in the door. That's an extremely high level. So I will include a 10 here. Okay. So moving right along, we're looking at the geographic location. Is it represented historically? So let's go back to our 990 data. We're looking for programs in Utah. I see that there are 2 other programs out of the 147 that were in Utah. There's a lot in the West I see, which is a good indicator. But, obviously Utah is not their main priority. California is probably a higher priority than Utah. So I will put this as mid-level. I'll say maybe a 6 because while we are represented historically, we aren't represented as well as other locations. Okay. So let's keep moving. We have about 6 more minutes. So I'm gonna, pick up the pace just a little bit to show you what one input can look like. All right. How closely do past grantees align to your own organization? So let's look. These are all of the past grantees. So if we're looking through here, I see Association Partners for Public Land. I'd have to look up what Big Thicket Association is, Cabrillo National Monument. I'm seeing that it looks like a lot of these are nature centers or, environmental learning centers, things like that. So as an environmental learning center, I'm going to say that I am represented. Okay. So let's say that I'm very well represented. And then let's look at our, new grantees. Have we historically received as much as past grantees? So past awards received, let's look down at the amounts. So this is actually extremely interesting because new grantees are on average getting, about $3,500 more than our repeat grantees. That shows, that is probably represented by this openness to new grantees, shows that they're trying to get some innovation and work with some new partners. So that shows that, that amount is, it's large for a new grantee. So have new grantees historically received as much? Absolutely, they're receiving more. So I'll put a 10 there. You could look at this question another way. If you're trying to build those relationships and get more money year after year, that might show that, obviously this would be a lower amount because repeat grantees are receiving less, right? So it really, that's one way that you could frame it for your own organization. Let's keep chugging. So is the median grant amount worth going after? So the median grant amount, for new grantees is 12,000. I would say that's very worth going after for my small team. I'll give it a 10. All right. So I see some great comments in the chat about the visualization of data. That is definitely one of the strong points of Instrumentl, and it's going to save you so much time. So, all right, let's keep chugging. So do historical giving trends show positive growth? Let's take a look. So we scroll up for this one, and here we can see over the past, few years with data up to 2020, we have been seeing a large increase. So there was this one drop, and since then it's been increasing. So I will say, yeah, there is a positive growth. It's not the craziest thing I've ever seen, but I will put a 9 for that. Show it's a good opportunity. Do we have the bandwidth to take on the proposal? Well, let's actually look at the proposal. So for this, we'll look back at our opportunity. So going from our 990 tab to our opportunity, let's look at what we actually need to submit. All right, so you can learn more by visiting the funder's website. So they will probably have all the application requirements on their website. I'm, in the interest of time, not going to do that. I'm just going to say that it's a relatively easy process. So let's give this, an 8. Could be easier, but ultimately not that difficult. And then do we have the bandwidth to tackle reporting requirements? Let's say for this instance that this opportunity has a lot of difficult reporting requirements. Let's give it a 3 to show that it is a little more difficult than some other options. And what does that give us? So as we see, once we put everything through, we get the end result of an 8.06, which results in a B for the grade. And if we're comparing that to our other opportunities, I see that this first AARP Community Challenge grant, shows a higher final score. So if I was prioritizing this, I would go about this opportunity first, the AARP, followed by our NEEF Greening STEM, and then go through our COVID-19 fund. Just to reiterate, these top 2 examples here, they were from a previous workshop. So those are just to help give a little bit of guidance. But when you're actually working through, you'll probably want to get rid of these and only put in the opportunities that are relevant to your project. Okay, so I know that was very quick, and we are approaching the end of our session. So I'm going to go back to our presentation, but this will all be included in the follow-up, along with a resource guide that will walk you through everything I talked about today and helping you set up your own decision matrix. Okay, so yeah, the moral of the story is put a bunch of opportunities in here. You saw how quickly we went through one. Put in all of your opportunities, and you'll be able to, within a matter of a few minutes, see which prospects to go after. All right. So our 3 learning takeaways. Prioritizing grant opportunities can ultimately save you time and help you be more successful with your grant applications. Prioritizing your funding opportunities can be systemized by developing weighted criteria and utilizing a prioritization tool such as we use today. And then using Instrumentl is a great way to turbocharge your grants. And you can always join us for more of these free trainings. We put these on regularly, not just summits, but also just normal educational workshops as well. All right. So with that, here's all of my information if you'd like to follow up with me, including the 2 promo codes that I mentioned earlier. Be sure to jot those down. We'll be putting a link in the chat that will direct you to our feedback form, which you can fill out by the end of Friday. And that will get you 3 resources for today, one of which is the ultimate guide to prioritizing your prospects in 7 easy steps. Goes over everything we talked about today. Okay. And so with that, our session 5 secret word is wins. All right. So our secret word for session 5 is wins. Be sure to jot that down. And in our follow-up, after the summit is concluded, you'll be able to input those and receive your certificate. Okay. So with that, thanks for attending session 2 for the day, session 5 for the whole summit. We are going to take another 3-minute break. And at 11:01 Mountain, which is 1:01 Eastern, we are going to be diving into our last session of the summit, which has to do with finding prospects in your backyard. Okay. All right. So go ahead and get some more coffee if you need it, grab a snack. And then when we come back, Will Yang is going to take over and take you through our final session.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chandler. And if you haven't already, share on social media what you took away from that last session. We are actively monitoring that and been seeing some great comments, some great learning takeaways. It's always great to just share what you're learning with other grant writing professionals, since not everybody was as lucky as you guys to be in the room today. And like Chandler mentioned, in about 2 minutes or so, we're going to kick off our last and final session of this Grant Writing Virtual Summit. We hope you've learned a lot along the way. It's our goal to be able to provide these sorts of educational opportunities for you, just so that you can level up your grants and also build the systems that you need for success when it comes to grant writing. And just as like a quick friendly reminder, prizes up for grabs today. We've got a number of Amazon gift cards available. In case you don't like Amazon for whatever reason, we have also many copies of Meredith Noble's How to Write a Grant, the Grant Writing Unicorn Method, to send out to folks. And then we still have the grand prize up for grabs as well, which is a $500 donation to your nonprofit, as well as a 1-month plus plan to Instrumentl. And on top of that, to help you combat potentially a grant writer burnout, a self-care kit from Etsy. And so all you need to do to enter for that is share what you're learning on social media with hashtag GWVS2022, tag Instrumentl so it's easy for our team to find, and we'll be announcing the winners to that in the coming hours after the summit today. If it is your first time here, I wanted to also share that there is some general housekeeping that I'll want to go over. But before we get into that, just a quick thank you to our partners. Without them, this would not be possible. These are just some of the many partners that have been a part of supporting this virtual summit and making it a reality. All right, with that, I'm at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get things kicked off. For some general housekeeping, like I mentioned before, if you want to enter to win one of our 20+ prizes today, all you need to do is share what you're learning as well as just what you're excited about in this upcoming session using the hashtag GWVS2022 and tagging Instrumentl. Also, look out for secret words at the end of each presentation. That is going to be really important for you to get your participation in terms of your certificate at the end of this workshop. And then with that, if you have any questions along the way and if this is your very first session of the summit, you can include 3 hashtags in front of your question. That will make it easier for Chandler, who's going to be moderating for those questions in the chat. And I'll try to answer some as they go along if I can. And then the last thing is there's a conference resource guide. Within that, you're going to find tons of partner offers, as well as more information about some of the sessions you had today, along with helpful additional resources of content we may not have covered over the 6 hours of education that we've gone over. This has been shared a few times, but just to reiterate, in case you are new to Instrumentl and you're looking to save a little bit on your first month or on your annual plan, you can use GWVS75 or GWVS2Mo. If you're a customer of ours, you can also use this in the case where you're looking to upgrade your plan from maybe a basic to a plus plan or something like that. Welcome to How to Find New Funders in Your Backyard in Under 60 Minutes. This is going to be a really fun session where we're going to learn 6 different tactics of how we can really refine our list beyond just what we may already have going for us. And so if you can share in the Zoom chat, it'd be great to hear from you what your name is, your organization, title, as well as your nonprofit's mission and latest initiatives, and your biggest challenge related to finding new funders. I'd love if you can also answer that last question in the context of, finding regional or local funders for you. And while you guys are typing that into the Zoom chat, I'm going to do a quick introduction to myself before kicking things off. My name is Will, and Instrumentl, our company, hosts weekly grant workshops with expert educators and best-selling authors. You saw a few of them in our very first session for today, but essentially we help over 1,800 nonprofits as well as nonprofit consultants to help find, track, and manage their grants in one place. Every day we hear about the challenges and we actually see the challenges of what people are facing when it comes to achieving their grant seeking goals. And it's usually from that sort of approach that we're able to then create this sort of educational content that really speaks to some of the actual experiences of grant writers. So first things first, I want to hear from you guys in the chat. If any of these situations resonate with you, give me an emoticon, give me a yes or a thumbs up or whatever it is that floats your boat. Let's get the energy up. I know it's the end of the day and it can be a little bit long being in all these different sessions and learning so much, but let me know if any of these situations resonate with you. Maybe you're in the audience today and you are just getting started and you don't have a consistent list of good fit funders. Well, hopefully if you followed along with Chandler's session in creating your free Instrumentl account, you were able to really find a short list of potential good opportunities. Or maybe you actually have an immediate list of funders. So you went through that process, you've got your 100 of results or so, but you're not actually familiar with additional funders in the subject area or the geographic area that your organization is based in. So, maybe you're based out of Los Angeles County and you have no idea of who are some of those local or regional funders that are valuable. And then lastly, you maybe feel swamped. So maybe you just have a long to-do list of things when it comes to grant seeking. And then actually, lastly, maybe you've just hit a dead end in which you can't find too many new good fit funders. So you might think to yourself whether or not grants are worth the effort. And as a central theme of this workshop, hopefully we've answered this pretty comprehensively, but just to nail it home, the answer is yes. There are over 87,000 plus grant-making foundations, over 11,000 active grants alone on Instrumentl, and we're adding over 100 every single week. So over the course of this final session today, this is where we're going to go. First, we're going to dig into why is finding new funders so hard? And then we're going to explore how do most folks actually find funders nearby. I want to hear from you in terms of if you've ever done any of the actions that I share with you today. And then I'm going to give you some key questions to help you match grant applications to funder interests before we dig into the meat and potatoes of today, which is the 6 tactics to figure all this out more easily with Instrumentl. And then sticking around with me until the end, I'm going to have a free bonus template as well to help you actually have a script that you can use when it comes to reaching out to past grantees. In addition to that script, I will also have a special 43-page guide that's going to help you in terms of taking all the tactics that we go over in today's workshop to find new funders in your backyard step by step in the case where you want to go at your own pace after this workshop. So first, let's dig into why is finding new funders so hard. So there's a lot of reasons why finding new funders is hard, but the first one is that it can sometimes be difficult identifying what's active and what's not. Tell me in the chat below if you've ever used a grant tool potentially that has shown you a long list of grants, but you have to actually take extra time to sift through whether or not that is an active opportunity, or if it's potentially just something that's outdated and they haven't actually been funding for several years. So I can see some yeses from Renee and Linda for sure. And another reason why finding new funders is so hard is because sometimes funders actually just share limited information. They actually don't want all that many grant applications being sent their way, or they just find it really, they're not in the tech savvy side of things and it's pretty much an unwieldy website in terms of figuring out what exactly is going on there. Or maybe there's the case in which you've actually found a potentially good fit funder, but what's actually being said about what that funder wants and what they're actually doing in their data trends is completely different. And then that leads me to the last point as to why funders are, sometimes really hard to find is because funder alignment can be really difficult to spot, right? It's something in which you might be operating off of limited data, or you might just have to be sifting through hundreds and hundreds of pages of those 990 PDFs to figure out, whether or not there is actual alignment in your geographic area. If you've ever found yourself opening those 990 reports, let me know in the chat. And maybe just as a ballpark, how many hours do you maybe spend doing that? Because I've definitely heard that be the case from a lot of folks before. So now that we know exactly, why it is so hard to find new funders nearby, let's talk about how most folks actually find funders nearby. And again, what I want to hear from you is there's going to be numbers on the screen in terms of 5 different ways that folks find funders nearby. Just give me a number in the chat in terms of which ones you've potentially done before. So here are 5 ways that most folks find funders nearby. The first way that I often hear about is asking your board, in which many board members are well connected with the community, or they actually sit on several boards and they're able to introduce your organization to another funder just because, they really like the cause area that you serve and they serve on several boards of similar organizations. If that is the case for you, give me a 1 in the chat below. And then another way that most folks will often find funders nearby is by asking existing funders. Similarly, program officers in local areas are often in touch about the challenges that a community is facing. And so in doing a series of interviews with local, regional community foundations in the last quarter, I heard this often being the case in which existing funders could be a great source for finding the next funder nearby. And the third way that a lot of folks will often find funders nearby is by reviewing who your funders have been funding, by looking up the award announcements on websites or digging more deeply into 990 data. We'll show you how to do that a little bit more easily later today. It's been gone over a few times over the course of this summit, but we'll really dig into some of these as we start to wrap things up for the session. And I see that definitely there's some people in the audience, Tim, Krista, Andrew have all done 3, sometimes doing 1 and 2 for sure. And so it's definitely a way that a lot of folks are finding funders nearby. The fourth way that most folks are finding funders nearby is through local networking. Maybe you're an active member in a local chapter of a nonprofit association or group, right? Maybe you're a part of the Grant Professionals Association, or maybe the AFP, or just some sort of local affiliation that is aimed at sustaining, the regional-based nonprofits in your state or in your city. That can often be a great way as well in terms of finding some of the more, closed door opportunities, or the opportunities that simply aren't as present in terms of their web presence. And so, it's more relationship driven. I know that relationships have been a big theme for today's workshops. And then the fifth way that a lot of people will actually find funders nearby is by reviewing donors and partners of local community foundations. This is where folks will go into the annual reports and then check out things like funding partners or the gifts section to that, or local news bulletins for clues. If you've ever found yourself on these sorts of pages, let me know in the chat below. I know that this is a great way that some more savvy grant writers have definitely turned to finding some of these funders nearby. And with that, now that we understand, what people often do when it comes to finding funders nearby, as well as why it is so often hard to do so, let's talk about some key questions that you can use to help match your grant applications to funder interests, which is something that a lot of you guys mentioned is very important from our last session when it came down to thinking about the criteria that we incorporate into your decision-making matrix. So when it comes to questions to match and align with funders, we like to say that there's really 4 key questions. However, if you want a more in-depth guide to these 16 key questions, you can always register for one of our How to Find New Good Fit Funders in Under 60-Minute sessions. There we dig into 16 exact questions you can ask, as well as a freebie there. However, these are those 16 questions condensed down to the 4 most important ones. And if you've been with me over the course of this summit, these should look familiar to you, because these are the same questions that I posed in our session on grants calendarings when we thought about alignment. So the first question is, what is the grant maker's mission, and does it align to your initiatives? A common statement that we've shared over the course of this summit is the importance of trusting your gut. If you read something from the grant maker's mission and you are having to struggle to think about how it aligns to what your organization does, well, then it's probably a stretch and you shouldn't pursue that opportunity. It's time to really focus in on the opportunities that are best fits for you. The second thing to ask yourself is, do you actually meet the eligibility requirements? In the case where they are looking for a particular type of funding to pursue and your project is completely different. So let's take, for example, you are looking for general operating, but they are looking specifically to fund education efforts. Well, again, that is not going to be really well aligned with the funder. And you might also ask yourself, is there a giving history that is similar to you? Can you find 3 to 5 organizations in their list of past grantees that are very similar to your organization? And then lastly, the question that is always going to be a priority for any grant writing team is, can your team meet all of the requirements? It's not just about applying for the grant, as has been mentioned a few times over the course of these sessions, but it's about being able to fulfill on those reporting requirements so that you can sustain long-term relationships with these funders. Because the cool thing about grants is that once you actually have those relationships in place, every single year kind of compounds in the prior year, in which you have a stronger base of initial funding. You can turn to that base to consistently raise your fundraising goals and continue to grow your organization. All right, so those are just some of the key questions when it comes to identifying funder alignment. Now let's dig into the core and heart of this session, which is 6 tactics to figure out how to do this more easily with Instrumentl. So these are going to be some tactics that we've shared before, as well as some tactics that we've never shared in another session. So you're in good hands in terms of learning something new from today. But before we dig into the tactics, I want to share 2 quotes for us to keep in the back of our head as we really ground ourselves and think about how we're going to approach finding these new funders in our backyard. So the first quote is, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. This is a great quote because it really speaks to a big theme that we've talked about over the course of all of our 6 sessions, which is the importance of stopping and thinking about how to make our grant seeking efforts more of working in systems as opposed to working in one-off, situations. A lot of times when people are pursuing grants, they come to us in the earlier stages and we tell them that they're not ready for grants. And the reason why is because they haven't actually gone through the process of going from start to finish with their grant proposals, and they don't actually know the ins and outs of what should be expected of them. And so as a result, they're trying desperately to get to the finish line on a single proposal, as opposed to working backwards on what are the component parts that they're going to need to keep doing every single week as they apply for the next opportunity. So if you can't break down grant writing right now into a process, or you aren't starting to get an understanding of what some of those foundational skills are, such as finding new good fit funders through prospecting, creating your grants calendar, going through a decision matrix or a logic model, well, then hopefully this summit has been a good starting ground for you to begin that sort of learning journey. And the second quote is, if you want better results, then forget about setting goals. Focus on your system instead. This really goes back to that book we've cited several times at this point on Atomic Habits, which is the organizations that we see seeing the most success in their grants are the ones that have been systemizing this. And this is something that our panel shared in session number 1 today in terms of the importance of creating SOPs, which are standard operating procedures. We've taught you some ways of how to actually use, and create standard operating procedures over the course of this summit. If you need to check that out, just be sure to check out the replay from yesterday as well as later today. So here are 3 goals for these 6 tactics as we start to build out our Lego, house. The first thing we're going to want to do is create personalized list of good fit funders for everybody. This is going to be your last opportunity to do so over the course of this last summit. And so I'll go over that for folks that are new to the session, since I know we've been having people trickle in and out over the course of the day. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to learn some new actionable tactics for prospecting. We're going to learn tactics in terms of how to actually look in our backyard or find organizations similar to ours that we may not have otherwise known of. And then the third thing we're going to do is we're going to use Instrumentl to save time in finding new good fit funders. Before we dig into those tactics though, we do have a prize giveaway. What you need to do is at this point, if you haven't already, or you've already done so and you just want to increase your odds, we're going to be doing some major drawings later today. And so this prize giveaway is going to be for Margaret, who is one of our panelists' online course. It is all about grant writing. It is worth $1,000 in terms of the normal price of this course. And so this is a very gracious donation from Margaret in terms of access here. This has a ton of modules, templates, and resources that can be useful as a supplemental perspective to the way that we've been teaching grant writing over the course of the last 2 days. All you need to do is share what you've learned with hashtag GWVS 2022 and tag Instrumentl. If you want to sweeten it, you can add another hashtag for grant writing so you can help other grant writers as well. But pretty much that is our prize giveaway for this session. So be sure to be on social and active, thinking about the different things that you've learned, whether it's in this session or over the course of the earlier sessions. Now, digging right in, let's first dig into tactic number 1, which is setting up personalized grant searches. For people that have already done this, you're going to be a little bit ahead of others, but for the most part, what we're going to do here is we're going to use Instrumentl to do this. If you already have an account, go ahead and log into your account. However, if you do not have an account, now's your opportunity to do so. Again, if you create a new account today and you haven't previously done so, then you're going to be eligible to double your chances of winning some prizes as well. And so I'm going to go ahead and click that link that Chandler shared into the chat. But our goal here is going to be in the next 10 to 15 minutes to come out with a really hyper personalized list of good fit funders, as well as a tracker for the opportunities for, from our template to live. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click that link. And then from there, our goal is going to be to save at least 3 opportunities to the researching tab as we are starting to ask ourselves those core questions that I just went over in terms of funder alignment. So I'm right here. I'm going to go ahead and create this account here. And then you're going to select 501c3. For folks that are new to the room, if you haven't already done so, Instrumentl supports US-based nonprofits with at least 90K in operating revenue. So that is going to be the requirement in terms of your sign up. But from here, when you go ahead and, I've actually already used this account before. I'm actually going to do this in a Firefox window. That's going to make it easier for me to sign up here. All right, here we go. All right. All right, so once you click that next button, what's going to happen is you're going to be able to schedule your onboarding. This is going to be more in depth than potentially what we go over the course of today's workshop. But essentially from here, what you can do is you can go ahead and book that for later. I'm going to join the next demo from there. And then I'm going to click next step. And once you are here in terms of let's help you find new funders, give me a thumbs up in the chat below. And then we're going to go through the process of creating a project together and then starting to go through and finding at least 3 new opportunities to save to our researching section. So again, go ahead and go to the link, the first one that Chandler posted in terms of if you're new and you don't have an account, click that link, create your account. And when you're following along with me on this page for Let's Help You Find New Funders, give me a thumbs up there. I'm going to pull up the participants tab on Zoom so I can try to see if other folks are giving me some thumbs up here. Yep, I just saw one actually. I missed it in terms of who it was, but I see 1 thumbs up from Tim. Good to see you, Tim. Bree as well, Amanda, another Tim, Hillary, awesome. Awesome. So as you navigate to that link, again, feel free to take your time on this. I'm going to have a few stopping points, but essentially what you're going to want to do. So Krista, if you already have an account, I think you were here yesterday, you can just log into that page, log into your account because you've already done this initial process. All right, so at this page, what you're going to want to do is you're going to put in where your organization is based out of. So in this case, I'm going to use the example where, some of you guys have been there with me as I created this, but just for the sake of really cementing this, I'm an after-school tutoring program based out of Los Angeles County. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save and continue to the project overview page. And at this section, this is where I'm going to be really specific about the project that I'm fundraising for. So maybe my after-school tutoring program has a literary component that is really focused on middle school students. So as specific as possible is the goal when it comes to your project name. And then you're going to answer your applicant type as well as whether or not you would like to see faith-based organizations or programs. So in the case where it's yes, you'll select that, and then you'll select your religious affiliation. In the case where you are not faith-based affiliated, you're going to select no. In my case, I'm going to select no. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and think about the areas that my project serves. So in this case, I'm going to focus on Alameda County as well as Los Angeles and maybe Sacramento as well. So Sacramento County and then Los Angeles. But essentially the goal here is for me to select all of the potential areas where I make the most impact within my organization. So maybe I have 3 local chapters that are all working in these respective areas. And then from here, what Chandler went over in the last session as well, but just to reiterate here, for fields of work, the goal here is to select 3 to 7 fields of work. For my case, I'm going to look for school. And then I'm going to select things like after school summer educational programs. You can see I have a middle school effort here. And I'm also going to look for things like literacy. And then I might also look for tutoring and mentoring. Once I've selected 4 fields of work, I'm going to go ahead and update that. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my grant size that I'm looking for. And in the case where you are struggling to think about some fields of work, feel free to message us later, or you can try messaging us directly right now. We can start to help think through some of those options for you. But essentially, in terms of the size of grants that we're looking for, what I've usually told folks is if you're in a small team, at least set a minimum of $1,000 because it's not going to be worth your time if it's just a really small grant, unless you're in a stage in your organization where you're just looking for some quick wins that just to prove out that you can win grants. From here, what you can do is select what your funds will be used for. It's going to be project, program, and GenOp for myself. And then I'm going to click Save and Exit. All right, so from here, I'm actually getting a call, or I'm getting this note because I went through a different link and not the one that you guys went through. But essentially what's going to happen is you are going to be redirected to a page that looks a little bit like this. So when you're at this page, you're going to have your project overview, and then you're going to be redirected to your matches section. So in this case right now, I'm going to actually pull up the STEM education program for my example here. But the goal here is that I'm going to be starting to go through this list of funding opportunity matches and try to identify at least 3 new opportunities to add to my researching section. All right. So as you navigate to this page, it's going to give you some sort of pop-up that tells you, hey, we found hundreds of potential new grants for you. You're going to click the Let's Go button. And then on the left-hand side, what I usually tell folks to do is to use that drop down and then filter down even more concretely on your search. So this could be something, for example, where maybe you just want to focus on private opportunities from the matches that you come out with. So in this case, I'm showing the 52 opportunities out of 210 that are potentially good fits for this STEM education program. And then on the right-hand side, this is where I start to run through those key questions that we've asked ourselves over the course of all these different sessions. The first question is, what is the grant maker's mission, and does it align to our initiatives? So in this case, we can see the NEAF Greening STEM grants. It's great to see STEM in the title. We can see that in general, as I scroll through here, they've collaborated with the Forest Service to look at holistic STEM programs on Agency of Science and Resources. And in this case, this is potentially pretty well aligned because they are really funding, STEM programming in general. And then another thing that we need to ask ourselves is, do we meet the eligibility requirements? So in this case, in the top section, you can see that the eligibility requirements are government entity, indigenous group, or nonprofit. We fit this criteria for nonprofit. We also fit the funding use criteria, and we fit the location of the project or residency. So far, so good there. Now we want to look into that third question, which is a giving history similar to you? So in this case, is there a giving history similar to you? Well, if I scroll down here and look at the map of the US, I can see that actually California is more commonly given to than some of the other states. And so that probably checks the box. But if I really wanted to filter that down, I can use that drop down for all states and then select California. From here, I can actually tell more on what type of organizations are getting funding. You can actually tell that most of these organizations are more like conservations or institutes and things like that. So maybe there is a better fit for me when I think about it in the context of after-school tutoring. This is something that I would have to factor in or do more research on. And the last thing I need to do is actually look at the review of the requirements. You can expand or go to the funders page, visit their website here, and then we can actually review the requirements and see whether or not we feel like we would have a chance in terms of applying for this particular grant. For now, though, I'm going to save this to new opportunities just so that you are going to be able to do more research on this at a later meeting. So maybe review at Wednesday's meeting. And you're going to take this approach with respect to anything that is in your funding opportunities tab. So you're going to save that to your project, put it in researching for later, and then you're going to work your way through the funder opportunities. But more importantly, what we also want to think about is what are some of the keyword terms that of similar organizations similar to ours. And that's going to lead us to tactic number 2. So again, tactic number 1 is for us to first just create a short list of funders. If you haven't already done so, you can create that using the link that has been shared in the chat. But essentially, once you've done that, you're going to have that short list of funders and you can start building on top of that. So how can we do this? Well, we can brainstorm keywords for similar organizations similar to ours. So let's take the example that we're an after-school program for high school students that receive mentoring and tutoring assistance. What we want to ask ourselves in these situations is what organizations regularly receive funding from our existing funders. So an example I've given you here is that it's probably very common that other boys and girls clubs or programs that focus on, K through 12 after school programs will likely have received funding from some of our existing funders as well. So if you just ask yourself, what sort of organizations are you often seeing at different networking events, or what sort of organizations are you often seeing in the funder pages when you go back to tactic number 5, or I think it was tactic number 3 or tactic number 5 from earlier today of how folks often find funders nearby. And then you want to ask yourself, what fields of work did you actually select when you set up that Instrumentl project? In our case, we selected things like tutoring and mentoring, after school programs, as well as middle school focus and things like that. And so from here, what we're going to think about is we're going to ask ourselves, what synonyms are people using when they think about some of the work that we use, that we do. So in this case, if I'm an after-school tutoring program and I'm doing general after-school tutoring for high school students and things like that, some keywords or synonyms that I'm often thinking about are things like literacy, STEM tutoring. I'm thinking about college achievement, college access as well. And these are the sorts of words or phrases that are probably going to come up a lot, because when you think about the general education system, people are essentially funneled from K through 12 until they're ready to be college bound, so to speak. And so these are going to be some of the synonyms that funders are likely going to prioritize when they're thinking about the work that organizations like ours do. And then you'll want to ask yourself, what organizations do you aspire to become more like? Is there an organization in your local area that does a lot of similar work to you, that you potentially always bring up when you think about your 3-year strategy, your 5-year strategy, or just where what your ambitions are for later on? So thinking about this for the example of an after-school program for high school students to receive mentoring and tutoring assistance, you can tell on the left-hand side that some level 1 thinking would be just words like after school, tutoring and mentoring, high school, pretty much some common, simple answers that you would probably give somebody if you were just at a general dinner party explaining what your organization does. But on the right-hand side, you can actually see the second order thinking of the sort of keyword phrases that you're thinking about. So you're thinking about things like educational access and equity. You're thinking about that question on career and college preparation. You're thinking about youth development and leadership, which are potentially not the direct skills that you're always teaching in your tutoring and mentoring, but they are the supplemental things that also come as a result of the work that you do. So the key takeaway for you here, as we think about tactic number 2, is to not be afraid to think outside the box, whether that's in outcomes, whether that's in terms of your objectives or your specific program components. So my exercise for you, which I'm going to give you a little bit of homework to take from each of these sessions, is to come up with at least 5 to 10 keywords that you can use for your research beyond what you often are searching for. In other words, I'm asking you to really flex your creative muscles in terms of the sorts of ways that you've been setting up your searches. So some tidbits that have been shared over the course of some prior sessions, for example, is if you're serving underserved communities, you might want to look at fields of work like minority services, or you might want to look at access and equity in terms of the community services section that you may not have covered earlier on in your projects. And then once you've come up with that, what that's going to do is it's going to give you the ability to then use that tactic as we start to dig into tactic number 3. So tactic number 3 is actually to use Charity Navigator to identify similar organizations. Here's how you're going to use Charity Navigator more effectively. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to navigate to charitynavigator.org. Then what you're going to do is you're going to want to take the earlier answers to tactic number 2 and input them into Charity Navigator. And then from here, the must do in order for this tactic to work is you're going to actually filter your results. All right, so I'm going to show you an example on the screen. I'm going to show it to you in slide format, and then I'm going to walk through it actually going through Charity Navigator site just so you can see it twice to really cement that for you. So let's take an example of the tutoring program we've been talking about. Here you can see that first level thinking, it was just the word tutoring. So what I've gone is I've gone to Charity Navigator and I've just searched for charity search. I'm searching for charity or for tutoring. And then on the left-hand side, notice how what I can do is I can filter by rated status as well as filter by state. So what I can do, for example, is in this initial search result, you can see how I'm getting 100+ results for just the general keyword phrase of tutoring. However, once I filter down for a rated status, so Encompass rated and the state of California, I've gone from those 100+ results down to 6 results that are potentially aligned or similar organizations to mine. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at these organizations because I'm going to see whether or not they are similar organizations in the nature of the work that they do to what we do. And this is going to allow us to then untap a new list of good fit funders because we're going to reverse research who is funding these organizations. So we're going to reverse research who's funding, for example, Momentum Tutoring or the Bay Area Tutoring Association and so on. So what I want you to do in order to use this tactic when you're on Charity Navigator is I want you to filter by your keywords. So go through that list of 10 to 15 keywords that we asked you to do in tactic number 2 and just search for this. This is just going to be a general query that's going to search through all of the existing organizations out there that have some sort of derivative phrase that's similar to what your organization does. And then from there, you're going to filter down by either Encompass rated or star rated. And the reason why is because oftentimes these folks are going to have more meaningful assets and data available for you to reverse research. Oftentimes, if they aren't rated by Charity Navigator, then they're usually a much smaller organization where it's a lot harder to get this sort of data. But our goal here is to build a list of similar organizations to us. So from here, what you're going to do is you're going to copy and paste these into a spreadsheet along with the EINs, and then you're going to bookmark this results page to save it for later, and then repeat this process for all of your other keywords, fields of work, or states that you used earlier. So the exercise I have for you for tactic number 3 is to complete a Charity Navigator search for at least 3 of your keywords. All right. If you're following along, let me know in the chat. Let me know if you've ever used a tactic like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and show you an example of going to Charity Navigator in terms of using this strategy. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate to Charity Navigator. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about some of the keyword phrases that may come up when I think about, some of the work that I am doing. So maybe I want to search for the phrase at risk. I've never done this before, but just for the sake of, the example, because Kim was kind enough to kind of build upon, their work, I can search for at risk, and lo and behold, you can see that I have 100+ results that are initially coming up. And then what we can do is I can go ahead and start filtering down my results. So I'm going to first filter by California. That takes my results down to 156. And then now you can see how there are just 13 organizations that have the real badge that we're looking for, which is Encompass rated or Give with Confidence. So I'm going to first look for the Encompass rated folks, but now you can see that I have this very simple search. I might have to do a little bit more digging because at risk is a very broad phrase that can cover a ton of different organization types. But essentially what I can do from here is I can open up these organization portfolios to do a little bit more research. And then I can essentially see whether or not I can record more information about these organizations. So in this case, this is Angels at Risk. You can see their mission statement is nice and consolidated right here to see whether or not it's something similar to what we do. So in this situation, we have a community issue of drug and alcohol use and abuse in kids. It's an epidemic crisis. And so this is all about at-risk educational programs. So in this particular example, this is somebody in which I would want to collect their EIN number. And if you want a little trick, if you ever want to create a new Google Sheet without opening up a new tab, you can just type in sheets.new, enter. And then from here, what I can do is I can go ahead and just copy and paste this into an EIN section. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy the name of the organization right here. And now I've got a working sheet that I can start to work through, and then I'm going to continue to take this sort of approach. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the next one. In this case, this is the Health Education Council serving populations at risk. I don't know for sure because there's no mission statement right now. It's kind of just saying public health education. I could go to their website though to potentially learn a little bit more. In this situation, you can see how they cultivate health and well-being in underserved communities by leveraging the power of collaboration. So maybe not. I mean, just for the sake of having another example, I'm going to copy this guy in just so that I can potentially reverse search this guy later on in the next tactic. So from here, what I'm doing is I'm just creating that laundry list of organizations that might be interesting to me. So let's say we've done this a couple times. Well, from here, what you can do is you can then do that for the next keyword. So what you might look for after this at risk is, you might look for college access or something like that. And then you'll continue to work your way through this sort of filtering process. Again, search the keyword phrase, work your way through the state, and then filter by the ratings, because these will often be the larger organizations that have way more data for you to parse through. All right. So if you're following along with me so far, give me a reaction in the chat. Tell me, I see that a few folks have done this for federal grants. That's a great to hear as well. What we're going to do from here is we're actually going to leverage Instrumentl's quick find feature as tactic number 4. So all of you guys have your Instrumentl accounts at this point. And so what you're going to do is you're going to use the quick find feature to make it really easy to look up an organization by name or EIN. And then from there, If they have any open opportunities already, they will show up in the results. But if not, you can do more due diligence, add them to your backlog for you to research. And this is really powerful when you combine it with tactic number 3. And let's see why. I'm going to show you first through screenshots, and then I'm going to show you live, again, showing it to you twice so you can really cement this sort of tactic for you. So in the top left of your Instrumentl account, there is a quick find section. And what you can do is once you navigate there, you can type in by name or EIN. So now you should your gears should be turning in your head, and you should be realizing that the reason why we did that research on Charity Navigator in collecting the organization name as well as the EIN is so that we can use it here. So at this point, in the example I showed in my screenshots, I had the Bay Area Tutoring Association, and you can see how the Bay Area Tutoring Association has come up here. And so what I'm doing is I'm going ahead and reverse searching them in Instrumentl. From here, when you do that, on the right-hand side of the recipient page, you're going to see a section called Past Awards Received. That is where Instrumentl has already done the heavy lifting for you to help you identify, who has this grantee received funding from. So when I click that, what's going to happen is I'm going to see the section on who has been funding this funder. So in this case, the Kia Foundation gave them a $30,000 grant in terms of some tutoring budgets. All right. So you can do this over and over again. So just to really hit this point home, the second example we had in our Charity Navigator results when we did our initial screenshots method was the Healthy Cities Tutoring Inc. And so in this case, I went ahead and put this into the quick find. I navigated to the past awards received section on the right-hand side, and you can see how this, your mileage may vary depending on the organizations, but this is why we did this for so many different phrases. It's because we create a huge potential list here. So here you can see that we have way more data than the first one in that we can see how some organizations ranging from the Dansford Foundation to the Bohannon Foundation have given to this particular organization. So what are you looking for as you start to work through this? What you're looking for is who are some foundations who are near you that are giving in your geographic area. The reason why is because it's always great to find a local funder nearby because they have an affinity towards your sort of community. The second thing you're looking for is foundations that have funded similar purposes to you. So when you look at that purpose section on that tab, it's going to explain what was written on the IRS 990 form. And that's where you want to see whether or not it aligns well to what your work is. And then you also want to figure out which foundations you want to research further. Maybe the purpose section is not meaningfully filled out. But what you can do is you can start continuing to go down the rabbit hole and do more research about that particular funder. So you want to repeat this process with every keyword, field of work, as well as nearby states that you used earlier. And then in just a few minutes, what you can do is you can find lots of prospects. So my exercise for you with tactic number 4 is to complete a past awards received search for at least 5 grant recipients. All right, so that's what I want you to do there. Just to show you that example though, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use that spreadsheet that I used here, and I'm just going to search in the quick find by EIN. I've never actually looked up this organization before, but I'm just showing you how I would do it. I go to the quick find in the top left, search for the EIN, I pull up the profile, right-hand side. What I can do is I can actually change to just the recipient profile, and then I can click past awards received. And here you can see the Orange County Community Foundation gave them some money. I see that in 2019, they were even more active in grants with the Moss Foundation, the David Geffen Foundation. And these would be the folks that I would then want to add to my backlist of potential good fit funders. So if you're following along with me, give me a thumbs up, and we're going to go ahead and dig into tactic number 5. So the 5th tactic for today is to combine with Instrumentl's funder matches feature in order to really further the amount of good fit funders in your backyard. So the funder matches tab is going to show you grant makers who submit 990s that may not have a website, or they don't have an open way to apply or submit an LOI. The reason why this is really important is because it's a great way for you to identify relationships to build in the next 6 to 12 months. We have a blog post on how to build relationships with invite-only funders that you can learn more on, and we'll try to share it in the chat a little bit later on in the session. But essentially, this is going to be that second tab in Instrumentl. And if you just created your account, you'll see that access to that tab. In the case where you're a customer and you don't have access to that because you're not in the Plus plan yet, just shoot us a message and we'll give you a Plus plan access so you can see this for yourself as well. But the reason why this is really powerful example is because this funder matches section is where you're going to find a lot of good fit funders that may not be immediately open for grants, but it's still a good opportunity for you to build a meaningful relationship over the 6 to 12 months. So as you work your way through this list, what you're looking for are a few general guidelines. The first thing is I want you to prioritize funders that have been giving to at least 30% new grantees. We've emphasized this number a few times, and the reason why is because historically we find that these funders are pretty receptive to establishing new relationships. The difference between a funder that's giving above this 30% threshold and a funder that's only giving 9% to new grantees is night and day. And then what you're going to want to look for as well is you're going to want to look through some of the same core areas that we went over earlier. What are the fields of work? What are the grant amounts? What is the history of giving in the cause area and the geographic regions? So here's an example here where I've got my STEM education project. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and searched for the phrase California. And a pro tip for you is you can search by keywords and by location in the bar to the right of filter. So in this case, when I search for California, you can see how I'm getting a search result of Bright Funds Foundation. And on the right-hand side, you're essentially asking yourself those questions that we've been asking ourselves and identifying potential good fit funders. Here you can see the grant amount is $5 grand, as much as 1.8 million. I have no idea what that grant is, but I'd love for that. And then in this case as well, you can see fields of work of after-school summer educational programs, STEM education, education high school as well, and a history of giving in Los Angeles County, which is where our organization is based out of. So in this case, you can quickly check for alignment by using the right-hand funder 990 report, and that'll have all those visualizations that we've shown a few times over the course of this summit. So this is really nice because this algorithm is often very location-based. And so it's going to actually shortlist for you local organizations oftentimes at the top of that list, as long as you keep that filter parameter to best match. So as you work your way through this, here are some of the things that you're looking for. If you scroll down on that 990 report and you see a past grantee section, you're looking for predominant coverage in the states that you are based out of. So in this case, I can see there's a lot of representation in California, which is a great check mark for me. The next thing that we just talked about was 30% or more going to new grantees. I can see in this particular situation, this funder is 51% going to new grantees, a great track record to being open to new relationships. And then just to really hit things home, another thing that I'm looking for is the NTEE code. Here, I'm looking for my cause area being in the top 5 to 7 of the codes by the funder. So in this case, I can see education is ranked 3rd out of all of the cause areas that this funder has given to. So my fifth tactic for you, my exercise for you, is to try to save 3 good fit funders from your funder matches. All right, so at this point, we've really talked through a lot of key helpful tactics here, but what I want you to do is I want you to go through that funder matches section right here when you go into the second tab here. And then what I want you to do is work your way through here. And then as you're working your way through here, save a few funders to continue to research further. Again, what we're looking for are some of these trends. We're looking for the past grantees, whether there's representation in our area. In this case, I can see there is. If I filter by California, I can just see all the organizations in California. And then I'm also looking for past grantees, going to a lot of new grantees, 42%. In this case, I can also see NTE code. Education is number 4, and so it matches most of my criteria. So go ahead and do that as tactic number 5. And then let's start wrapping things up with tactic number 6, which is kind of the culmination of all of these tactics. So tactic number 6 is to pinpoint grant funder interests using the RIC method. All right, so here's how you can use the RIC method. The first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to research the grant funder's website. This is where it's all about mission matching. So what you're going to look for is the mission, the values, the guiding principles, as well as their vision, priorities, or focus areas. You are looking for alignment here. Once you've done that, you're going to Instrumentl the funder. So this is where you're going to look up past grantees, look at their NTE codes for major areas of giving. We just looked at that, as well as explicit references to active funding opportunities. In the case where you see that there is an active funding opportunity and it matches all these things in terms of the initial research you did, this is the third step, which is you're going to actually pick up the phone and call. assuming they have not explicitly said not to call them. Obviously, reserve yourself from the C if they say not to do that. But here's how you would take these 3 steps into an actual example. So let's say, for example, we're on the Foundation for Child Development's website. This is a screenshot of their website. Well, what I'm looking for as I am on this page is I'm looking to identify what is their mission. In this case, I can see their mission is to build better lives for young children. What are their priorities? Well, I can see that their priorities are filling gaps in knowledge. All right, so now I'm going to start looking through their mission statement, their goals, their grantees, as well as other information. So as I go through this, I'm going to open up their annual report. So what you can often do is you can look up these funders' annual reports, and you can start to really see whether or not they are doing what they say they care about. That really goes back to one of the earliest slides of today, which is it's one thing for a funder to say they actually care about something and then to actually do that in their actions through their data. So here you can see here at their annual report that they really do seem focused around these different parts of developing children as well as building better lives for young children, which was their mission statement. And as I go through their annual report, you can actually find some tidbits as to what funders care about. So in this situation, you can see that new grants that were awarded between 2019 and 2020 were really focused in terms of early care and education, and really focused on the 3 workforce goals that we just looked at, and looking at some of the implementation of the approach to, highlighting these sorts of changes. So these can be great places for you to actually tell more about the funder before you've actually done your initial outreach to the funder. And the reason why you want to do this is because if you can demonstrate that you've done your research beforehand, well, then it's something in which that funder is going to be way more impressed with you and way more likely to give you time in terms of helping you along in their process. So then what you've done once you've researched the funder is you want to instrumental that funder. So in this case, I have the Foundation for Child Development that I've pulled up here, and I'm going to the past grantee section. And when I do that, what I can see is that in the grant amounts, they are giving on average 30K in grants. And you can see there's a wide variety of different grant amounts. But for the most part, what I can tell is that this is a meaningful grant. This is something in which I would likely have to put in some meaningful effort in order to really do well with this grant and succeed. But what I'm also thinking about as I go through this funder is there representation in my area or in my geographic as well as my interest area? So to answer the geographic question, I look here and I can see that in this situation, there is representation. That representation is in the state of California, and I can see that right here. And then as I keep on going to the NTEE code, I can also see that education is a major funding area. It is actually their top funding area, so they really care about this cause. So now I've aligned what I've read on the website with what the actual data says, and here is where we're then going to start closing the loop with the call. So here in Instrumentl, you're going to see the phone number, and this is where you can then call the funder and learn more about their process. Here are a few starter questions that you might find useful as you do this sort of approach. The first question is, how has your organization's research priorities changed over the last year? The reason why is because you noticed that when I looked at that annual report, it was talking about the grants in 2019, 2020. A lot has happened in the world in the last 2 years, as you can imagine. And so their priorities may have changed over the last few years. Another question to ask is, it's evident that your organization values XYZ. How do you see that value exemplified in your work? The reason why you use it in this phrasing is because it demonstrates that you've already done your research on the funder. And when you do that, you help differentiate yourself in terms of your actual ask of them in terms of getting more information. And the last question you want to ask yourself or ask the funder is, our organization really identifies with your goal, their goal. What do you see as the next steps towards that goal? Again, the reason why you want to take this sort of approach in your questioning is because it demonstrates that you have shown up to really present themselves with thoughtful, intentional questions, as opposed to just blindly reaching out to them and asking them, hey, how do we do better with your grant? And so if you need a bonus template for reaching out to past grantees as well, past grantees can be a great source of learning more about funders as well, and really supplementing that research stage in the RIC method. So here's an example of how you might reach out to past grantees. Here's the template. It'll be available in the slides and the recording as well, but essentially goes something like this. Hey, name, I'm your name. Your title, your nonprofit, as well as your mission. We're currently considering applying for Foundation's grant. I noticed they funded you for XYZ purpose, whatever you found in Instrumentl, in whatever year that you saw. And I was wondering if you'd be so kind to share if you felt the grant process went really well and overall impressions of the foundation. Would you be willing to connect for 15 to 20 minutes? Thanks so much. The reason why you want to ask for this is because it's a really small ask. You will often find that grantees do not get asked this, and that many people are willing to help. And because ultimately everyone can win when we are able to give better grant opportunities to all these different foundations, as well as just learn from each other. As you can tell, we have 100 of you guys in the same room right now learning together. So from here, what you're going to do is you're going to schedule a time to interview them, and then you're going to ask them about overall impressions about the grants process. What went well? What could have been better? What were certain parts that they thought enabled them to be successful for the grant? This is the inside scoop. And this is what all the grant writing pros do that they don't tell you that they do in terms of really positioning their applications for success. And then you can also even ask for a copy of their grant application. Sometimes they'll say no, but it doesn't hurt to ask. And you can also get inspiration by asking how they funded their project. And then I always recommend that you send a thank you note and maybe a gift afterwards for their time. That can be something as simple as a small token of appreciation. If you need to chat about your grant strategy with a member of the Instrumentl team, you can use the link that's going to be in the Zoom chat to book some time to do so. Before I wrap up here today, I'm going to share 5 additional resources to help you. You'll also find some of these resources in the virtual summit resource guide on the very last page. But essentially, here are some helpful free resources on our blog, like how to match your grant application to funder interests, find funders for grants, etc. You can just bookmark our blog, save it for later. It has a ton of free content and release content every single week or so. And then 3 learning takeaways for today. The first thing is that you can combine tools like Charity Navigator with Instrumentl to build a proven system for finding funders in your backyard. We started with just simple keywords and then using those keywords to think about the second order keywords and then working those into Charity Navigator and then using all those results in doing our reverse research in Instrumentl. Hopefully you feel a little bit like Sherlock Holmes right now because you've done so much grant sleuthing that you feel on top of the world in terms of the list that you have now. A second learning takeaway is that you can use the RIC method when it comes to pinpointing grant funder interest easily. Notice how in that example for child development, we essentially were able to identify the actual interests of the funder, reverse search them in Instrumentl and see that there actually was a good fit, and then talk about next steps in terms of reaching out to that funder and getting meaningful information. And then the third learning takeaway is that you can use that extra bonus template that I shared today to go the extra mile and get some of the best information from past grantees. That can be something that is simply not used a lot, and oftentimes you'll find that taught in more intermediate or advanced grant writing classes. Following up with me, if you want to reach out to me, here's my contact information. But more importantly, if you want to save $75 off your first month, you can do so with the code GWVS75 or GWVS2MO. Hopefully you've been actively sharing on social media what you learned, because you'll also be entering to win one of 20 plus prizes that we have to give away today. And if you want to submit your feedback form to get your freebie today, this is a completely new resource. We have never released this in any other workshop. You guys are the debut class of this. So if you're looking for a 43-page guide that digs into these 6 tactics more in depth, step by step, gives you the exercises, gives you the homework, you can follow along, print it out, follow it along. All you need to do is submit that form, and then you will get access to this freebie as well. With that, I'm going to tell you the 6th and final secret word, which is going to be grants. So the 6th and final secret word is grants. If you've been following along over the course of this summit, you know that if you collected 4 of those 6 words, you will get a certificate for attending. This is going to be the final and most important secret word in terms of those secret words. And with that, I'm going to open up, I'm going to see if there are any initial questions I can answer, but at the same time as well, I'm going to continue to see if I can answer these, and then I'll start to do final thoughts or final words and wrap up from there. I actually think that most may have been answered by Chandler. So with that, the last thing that I'll share with you are just some closing thoughts for today. If you haven't already and you haven't already gone on social media, whether that's Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and tagged us and used the tag hashtag GWVS 2022 greatly encourage you to do so. It's going to be last call. We have a grand prize of a $500 donation to your nonprofit, a 1-month subscription to Instrumentl's Plus plan, which is a $326 value, as well as a self-care kit. So it's pretty much a grand in value in terms of the grand prize there. That's on top of Margaret's All About Grant Writing course that we're also giving away, on top of Amazon gift cards, and on top of Meredith Noble's How to Write Grant Writing Unicorn Method. And so tons of prizes, tons of great odds, honestly, if you guys take care of that. But this concludes Instrumentl's Grant Writing Virtual Summit 2022. Over the last 2 days, we've run through 6 hours of educational content and had a blast doing it. And so just a reminder to do that. I have a few questions, actually, I'll answer before we wrap up here. Ruth asked if Instrumentl works with CRMs or Salesforce. The way that most of our customers do that today is they export their report through a CSV and then import it into their CRM. Because there's so many different CRMs, it's something in which that's the most helpful way that people do that right now. But we are looking for more direct integrations in the future as well. With that as well, thank you so much again to our sponsors for making this event a reality. And please do submit that feedback form. We're hoping to potentially put together a summer virtual summit, but it really depends on how popular it is with you guys. So you tell us, let us know on social media how valuable it was, and we'll see if we can put together something in a few months. And then make sure you get your freebies as well as your enter to win your prizes by using hashtag GWVS. And we'll keep this room open for the next few minutes while you submit those eval forms. I know there's some questions coming in terms of the feedback form. So we're going to reshare day 1 as well as day 2, just so that you have that all in one place and you can submit your feedback all at once as well. Awesome. And just to reiterate as well, with the prizes today, if you were on the fence and you did not create your Instrumentl account yet, if you do so and it's the first time doing so, you'll double your chances of winning a prize. And also for customers, you are also still eligible too. So just share on social media what you're learning, and you'll also be in the pool as well there for you guys. Awesome. It looks like we have all the forms that we need here. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. It's the top of the hour. We are good to go. And we hope you've learned a lot in the last 6 hours or so of grant writing content. We're going to go ahead and share the forms again. Let me just go ahead and pull that up so that you have those feedback forms. And then we'll also send this in the follow-up after the summit. So this is day 1, and this should be day 2. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. See you guys in our next grant writing workshop.